Okay, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. This is David I here in Scotts Valley, California. And on the line is Jim McKeith and Tim Del Caro. Jim, you're in beautiful, warm, and balmy Boise, Idaho? Not.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, very cold there. But
it is.
yeah, and Jim's going to be helping uh, take a look at the Q&A log. He's going to keep me honest so that I don't forget to share my screen like I've done twice before. And Tim also is online. He's the product marketing manager for Rad Studio, so Tim will be able to help with any product related questions, pricing, updates, all those kinds of things, as well as technical questions. This is part of our Rad-In-Action series of monthly global webinars. We've had many different ones over the past year or many years. And so the Rad-In-Action page is where you'll always find the replay, the videos, white papers, links to source code, slides, and so on. So just go to the Rad-In-Action page and click on the Learn More for each of these. Last month we had Danny, and Olaf talking about how to hook into your infrastructure, all the different infrastructure bits you might have. And again, No App is an Island. That was Kerry Jensen on FireDAC and database programming, the native development for iOS and Android in September. Ray Konopka, great talk in August, data visualization in a multi-device world. So lots of the things, and this one will appear in there. And we're starting to schedule the Rad-In-Action monthly global webinars for 2014 right now. So stay tuned to our website and emails that we'll send that'll give you all of that. The Embarcadero Doc Wiki has all the documentation being updated in real time, and then we generate the help files and help file updates from the Doc Wiki. So it's the ultimate in real-time updated information about using the components, using the tutorials, using the product, and so on. Android, one of the common questions we get all over the world is, what versions of Android do you support? And this page here on the Doc Wiki, Android devices supported for app development, talks about the Android versions. Gingerbread, ice cream sandwich, jelly bean, and KitKat. KitKat just released a little while ago. You need an ARM7 processor with Neon instruction set support. And then we're updating this periodically. We're testing on a lot of different devices. We'll update this to make sure it all works for the devices you have. And if you report other devices, I think Jim mentioned there's a Wikia, Delphi Wiki, that also where community members are testing Android apps on lots of different devices with different variations of Android versions. No Android version is exactly alike, just like no device is exactly alike. Just to answer another question that usually comes up before we get to the demos, people ask, well, how do I know if my Android device or if my user or my customer device will support applications built with Delphi for Android? And there's a utility Christopher Moeller built called SysCheck. It's in Google Play. You can see it there. Just search for SysCheck inside of Google Play. You run it on an Android device, and if it says ARM CPU, ARM v7, and if it has yes next to Neon support, then that device will run Delphi for Android applications successfully. Even if some no's pop up, we're not using some of those features. But all you really need is ARM v7 and Neon support, and you need one of these Android versions. And of course, there's always more APIs to wrap, and there's more devices to provide direct hardware support for sensors and other things. And it's an ongoing process, and we're testing and updating and adding capabilities and doing demos and blogs to show you how to do everything. Jim has Google Glass. I have Google Glass now, and we have blog posts to show you how you can build applications and cool things you can do with Google Glass, which is an Android device. You'll see that today. I've got mine sitting here in the lab with an example that Jim did and quick example that I built. One final question, just to get ahead of all the questions that people usually ask about, is they'll ask, where do I get the latest source code? Where do I get the latest samples? Where do I get all the examples you're using today, David? All of our demo code for Rad Studio is in SourceForge. And when we build and install, we take a snapshot of the samples that are in SourceForge, and we create them as part of the install, and they show up in your users, public documents, RAD Studio, 12.0, samples, and then the subdirectories. If you have a SVN client for your Windows machine, you can go to the samples folder in that directory, right mouse click and say SVN update, and point it at the RAD Studio, a SourceForge area, and it will update all your samples from the SourceForge repository. So it's always the latest place to get all the samples, and we're adding new samples all the time, and we're updating the samples so they're there on the RAD Studio XE5 update that's up here at the top of the screen. What I'm working on now is I'm running on my MacBook Pro, running OS X 10.9 Mavericks as the operating system. And I'm using Parallels Desktop 9 so that I can have a guest operating system, which is Windows 8, and that's where my IDE runs. And my IDE talks through TCP/IP to this thing called the Platform Assistant Server. The Platform Assistant Server is a deployment and a remote debugging capability, and it assists the Windows-based IDE to do things on the Macintosh. So it's sitting down here on a certain IP address and a certain port, and that lets me do things I need to do when I'm doing either OS 10 development of an application or iOS development. What you see on the screen is my iPhone 4S running iOS 7.0.4, and it's displaying in this area. We use a utility called Reflector from reflectorapp.com, and it allows me to show you my iOS devices on the desktop so that they can be displayed through GoToWebinar for you. I'll switch over to the IDE, and here's my RAD Studio XE5 Update 2 IDE. So here's the version. It says I'm running Update 2, and I've got Help Update 2, and I've got some other third-party utilities running. So I'm using the latest release, which was released to the public at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, Pacific Standard Time. Also, I'm using a utility to show you what's happening on my Android device. We use VM Lite. It's a utility you can purchase from Google Play. And then I'm using Real VNC to be able to view my VNC server that's running on my Samsung Galaxy S4 so that you can see what's happening on my device. I don't have to hold it up to a camera or whatever. Let's start and look at an easy way to get your mobile applications to be able to talk to remote SQL databases. This uses our DataSnap technology. This is a project group that lets me display employees and projects, and the employees who work on projects and the projects that have employee staff working on them. It has 4 different target projects in the project group: the DataSnap server itself, a FireMonkey desktop target application, a VCL Windows desktop application, and a FireMonkey mobile target application. So each one of these is sitting in the project group ready for me to show you what they can do. We activate the first target, and let's run it. This is our DataSnap server. It has connections to an Interbase database, and I'll start it, and now it's sitting here waiting for clients to connect to it. Now let's find our IP address, and that's the IP address 10.20.20.13. So let's go back over to my iOS device, and let's start up an application which is the mobile client employee for iOS. And this is a DataSnap client that's going to talk through HTTP to my DataSnap server. So we'll go over here and we'll put in 20.20.13, and then we can log in. And if I put the right IP address and the right port, now I'm showing the employees, my employee directory, and this is in a list view component. Notice it has the bounce, and it's got the inertia. Notice the bounce. If I slowly scroll it, then it slowly. If I really zing my finger on the screen, then it goes. It's got an accessory on the right-hand side, this little arrow. So if I want the detail about Leslie Johnson, I just tap on the item, and then it shows me that Leslie, her extension, and what project she works on. Down below, I can go through different employees with these buttons, get the next, the next, the next. Go to the back button, go back, pick another employee. Mark is working on the videos database project, and so on. Then if I go to the project tab, This is a tab control with 3 tab items. It's got dots on it, which means there's 2 different pages. So I can go and pick a project. It shows me the project, and then I can click on this button, which will do a tab slide that'll show me all the employees that work on the video database project. Hit the back button to go back to projects, go and see the staff again, hit back button, go to another project. It looks like nobody's working on translator upgrade, and so on. So that's just a simple application running on iOS, using tab controls, using tab slide animation and gestures to go and talk from my iOS client to my DataSnap server. Now you might ask, well, why do that? First answer is, I'm on iOS. How am I going to get to a database that's running on Windows or running on Solaris or running on Linux? Well, we need some way of getting to that database. If it's a Microsoft SQL Server database, you could say to yourself, well, then I'll just contact Microsoft and ask them, can I get a Microsoft client driver library to link into my iOS application? And they'll look at you and say, well, we don't have that, but if you go to Windows Phone, then we've got a client library. Or Oracle. Oracle will tell you, well, we'll give you this Java connector technology, and you can use that in your application, and that can talk to Fusion middleware, and Fusion middleware can talk to the Oracle database wherever it is on a server somewhere. If you're not talking to data local on the device or a database local on the device, you need some mechanism to get to the remote database, the remote SQL server, wherever it is. Now, you can build a SOAP server, you could build a socket server, you could build a REST server or a web service of some kind to do it, but then you're doing the work, right? You've got to figure out how to get the data types, how to get the metadata, how to get the data, how to marshal it, how to send it over to your client application. But with DataSnap and a few components that you use, it's all done for you. The data access, the converting it into packets, sending it over either TCP, HTTP, or HTTPS. It's your choice how you want to build your DataSnap servers and clients. And then you got to take it on the other end, pull it all apart, and put it into your user interface. So we do all that for you with a few components and wiring the components together and doing a few bindings of the user interface. And then maybe a few lines of code, and you're done. You get to talk to any database that our database access can do on a Windows server with the DataSnap server built in Delphi or C++ Builder. Now let's go back to our IDE. What we'll do then is we'll go over to this FireMonkey mobile target, and we've got different platforms enabled: iOS Simulator, iOS Device, and Android. And under Android target, we've got my Samsung Galaxy S4. So we'll switch to the Galaxy S4, and I'll bring up an application, the same app that I compiled and sent to my Android device. Same source code, same project, just target Android. It's called Employee Directory FMX Mobile, same as the iOS. This time it's compiled for Android using our compiler that's inside of the Windows IDE. And let's put 20.13 in here. So .20.13, and then hit login. And if I put it in, now I get the same list view, this time running on Android on my Samsung Galaxy S4. I can go and click on an employee, and I can see the information. I can go back and choose another employee and see, oh, that Chris is working on AutoMap. I can go through the different employees in my list using the buttons, video database, a bunch of people working on that as we saw on the iOS. Go to the project tab, choose video database, get the information, click staff, do the tab slide animation, and see the list of employees or staff that work on those different projects. Same source code, same form, just compiled and styled and deployed over to my Android device. Now let's go take a quick look at a couple parts of this application. On the DataSnap server side, we have a DataSnap server component, and that is the underlying DataSnap server. It has some settings that we can hook, like auto start. We can hook the event on connect, on disconnect, for example, maybe to log the clients that connect. We have at least one server class. It has a life cycle. Life cycle can be invocation, where a client will connect, do something with the server, and then go away. Session says we'll keep the thread active in the DataSnap server for each client that's currently connected, and the DataSnap server will manage each of those sessions in separate threads. The third option is server. That says that the DataSnap server, you need to write the code to manage all the client connections yourself. So the predominant use is running session management for each connection that's there. Then we have the web dispatcher. And the web dispatcher, or it might be the TCP dispatcher. This one is built as a REST server, so it's an HTTP web dispatcher component. There are other DataSnap servers that you can choose from. One is an HTTP or TCP dispatcher. So here's a TDS, the DataSnap server REST web dispatcher. Here's an HTTP web dispatcher. There's a wizard that lets you choose what you want, or you can just drop the components down and set, for example, the ports and so on. You can set the timeouts. You can specify where caches are and things of that kind. So there's a lot of options. You can specify filters to do operations on the packet, the JSON packets that are going back and forth. We have a compression filter and an encryption filter, and there are other people that have filters as well. Then there's the server methods unit. The server class is there. The server class has methods inside of it for doing all the operations, for invoking methods. It's there as the helper underneath the covers. If we look at the server methods unit, this is where we can put connection components, our database components, for example. So here's the connection to the Interbase database using FireDAC FD connection. We've got a couple of queries here. A projects query, an employees query, employees by project query, and projects by employee query. We've got two dataset providers. The dataset providers provide the metadata and data to the DataSnap clients that request information about the different queries and the different tables. And the dataset providers also get back any changes that you make when you call something called apply updates on the client side. The data comes back that you've changed. The dataset providers will pass it along to the database system, which will formulate SQL update statements if you want, or you could have some other mechanism, maybe a function that you call and pass parameters to. But here, built in and just wired together, we can provide data and metadata, and we can provide the updates back to the underlying tables and database. And again, all of that is done nicely in the DataSnap technology, all the marshalling of JSON parameters and JSON packets, the parameters to function calls, and so on. Over in the server methods, you can also specify your own remote methods. If you put any methods in the public declarations area, here's two samples that the wizard creates, then you can call those functions from your client applications. You can also restrict what operations can take place using authentication and using attributes to decide which client applications, when someone logs in, for example, at a certain level, which methods they can call and how much functionality they can get access to. Since this is a web module, we're going to go here and click the Open Browser button. It generated this client application for our DataSnap server. And since we put a JavaScript proxy generator over in the web module, it's down here. It's a DX proxy generator, and we specified that we wanted a JavaScript REST proxy generated for us, which means it will generate all the JavaScript code. A bunch of it is here. It does all the server function execution, the server function invoker, the JSON operations, parsing, and so on. All of that is generated by the wizard and by your module based on the interfaces that you provide. So we can go in and we can test it by clicking Open Browser. It'll launch the browser, localhost, knows what it's running on, 8080, and it will go and query the interfaces that are available, and it builds a sample page, HTML, to call one of the methods. So here's an HTML edit box. So hello world, I'll click the button. It will call that remote method from the browser to my DataSnap server that will reverse the string, and now we get however you pronounce hello world backwards. That code underneath that implements it is also in our server methods unit. So reverse string was defined to take a string and return a string, and then it calls the string utilities reverse string function, taking the parameter that was passed and returning the result for the function. And that's how the reverse string happened. So it's very easy. Write some methods that you want to call from your clients, from a browser or mobile clients or desktop clients, implement the server methods, and then on the client side, all we need to do is either drop components for data access on our form, or we can create a data module. So here's the data module. This is the same data module that is used in the mobile client, the desktop client. It's down here, the same one, and the FireMonkey desktop client. So here's common data module as well. So what's in a data module on the client side? It's a connection component with the driver type of data snap. If we look at the parameters, it's got an IP address and a port 8080, and it's using communication port HTTP. If we said in the wizard or in our code use TCP, we could set this to TCP. If we wanted HTTPS, it would have HTTPS. You could choose a different port. All that's part of the wizard, or you can just drop the components down and set the parameters to match. Data set provider connection component, what it does is it talks through the connection. It gets all the requests and the results of, so the data, the metadata, and so on. Then we drop down client data sets. Client data sets can cache the data that they get through the provider, through the connection, from the data set provider on the data snap server, from the databases, and then have it locally and bind it to the user interface. You can also load from a local database, and you can save the current state of the client data set information in case you want to be disconnected from the database. Maybe shut the mobile client or the desktop client down, come back later, start back up, make more changes to the data, and then call apply updates. So each client data set talks through that provider connection, and then the provider name is that data set provider, in this case like the projects provider that was over here in our server methods. There's that DS projects provider. The other one is the DS employee. And so if I look at something that's employee related, it's going to talk through the DSP employee provider name, again with the connection. The provider connection just needs to know that it's talking through this connection, and we key in the class name, T server methods 1. So if we look at our server methods, its class declaration is T server methods 1. And once we do all of that, all the magic happens. And you can focus all your effort on your client application. So let's look at the tab form. We've got our login page. Here's where we put in username, password. I didn't have to do that in this case. The server IP address, the port, for example, 8080. Here's the employee tab where we have employee information in a list box. So here's a list box with some list items. And then on the projects page, we have the project information, and here's a memo, T memo, that gets data from the text blob in the project database table that's over somewhere on a server somewhere. And then these buttons, for example, to give us the project staff that works on a project, that's just an action called CTA project employees, and we can go and look at the action list, right mouse click action list editor, and CTA project, what was that, project employees list. We can see, oh, that's a tab employees list. It will then fire that action off, and we can go and navigate to that action. I wanted to go to employee list, so tab project list, for example, and then go over to the source code where we implement those different actions. Key down, key up, here's a project click, set tabs active, and so on. Using the user interface elements for mobile, we get custom look on each device. So on iOS, it has the iOS look. On Android, it has the Android look. I'm sitting in my design environment, dropping user interface components down, using the live bindings designer to see where I've got data module like the server, where I've got the employee information bound to the list view 2 on a certain tab, and we can zoom in and zoom out all of this. You can even create layers, put some of these components on different layers and show and hide layers. You can also save it the image of your whole live binding design. This little amber color says that this is one of the data modules. It's in a separate unit. It's a used unit. It's not on the unit or form that I'm currently on. So we get a little visual reminder that these are coming from some other place. In this case, from the data module, the employee projects, the employee client data set. I wanted to show this and go through it in a lot of detail because I wanted to make sure that everybody understood, hey, here's a great way when I'm building multi-device client applications that I want to connect to a SQL database somewhere on a remote server. What's a great way to do that? And a great way to do that is leverage the data snap technology that we have. Or you can write your own code, create your own services, marshal everything, and have at it. I'd rather write less code and focus on my business logic and the database and where it is. And again, I might have one application for a customer might be using Oracle on the back end, another one might be using SQL Server. The clients stay all the same because they're just talking through DataSnap Server. I'd go to that DataSnap Server module and have the FireDAC connection component point at Oracle, point at Microsoft, point at MySQL, point at Postgres, or whatever. And then I can deliver the same client applications across 4 different platforms that don't have to change. In fact, even the server side doesn't have to change if the metadata is the same. I just have to change the connection string in the FireDAC connection component. And that's pretty cool, and that means productivity for all of you. Another capability that's new inside of XE5 is the REST client library technology. And I'm going to bring up a REST debugger that is built with the REST client library. So REST is a standard. There's a lot of REST servers that are sitting out there. Facebook has a REST server. SharePoint has a REST server. Salesforce.com has a REST server. There's all sorts of REST servers that are out there. They all take REST calls and they serve up JSON packets. Maybe you can do a simple login, but our REST clients library components also support OAuth 1 and OAuth 2 if those systems are what are being used to be able to log in and connect to the systems. So what I did is I added the REST debugger, which we give you, and we give you the source code to. It's a way of testing out a REST server to see what it's got and what data comes from it before I start building an application. There's also a REST demo application that has connections to different REST servers that are out there, but I've built my own REST client application. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And down here, I've already started the REST debugger. And this is the REST debugger. You can put your request in. You can choose what the method is. Is it a get, a put, a post, or a delete? Those are the 4 types. Here's the URL I'm using. This is a discography website, has an API. So it'll give me information about different performers that record music, about the albums, about the images of themselves, and so on. Information about each of the albums. And then the content type I want, you can choose the content type. Is it Atom XML? Is it XML? Is it something else? Is it HTML? Is it JSON? This one is JSON, so I'm there. And then I can provide any parameters I want along with the request on the URL. In this case, I want to go to the resource artist because it's a REST request, so artist /. And then in curly braces, I'll put a parameter that I'm going to specify next. And so this will form part of the JSON request going over. And in this case, I want to set the name parameter equal to Kelly Clarkson. So we can right mouse click, or we can click on the edit button and see, okay, it's a URL segment. This is the parameter. We might have several different parameters we want. I'm going to put in the value, Kelly Clarkson. And then once I set that up, if I need any authentication, in this case, this site is free and open, api.discogs.com. I've set the parameter I want, Kelly Clarkson. I don't need a proxy server, so I can just send the request, and it'll give me the response, and it says that it's an HTTP 200, okay. It tells me how many bytes of data were returned. I can look at the body of what's returned. So here's, for example, the API. It returned some information, and then further down, it returns some additional information and more and more and more. This is all the JSON pieces that were coming based on Kelly Clarkson. I can then choose a root element I want to look at, and we can put in a response artist profile, apply that, and now down here in the debugger, it gives us the profile information of the artist Kelly Clarkson. She was born in 1982. We might want to say instead, let's get the images, and so we can apply that. And we get the different images that are available through this discography website. And if we want to look at the data coming back from the REST server in tab form, we can click tabular data. So you can assign the data that comes back in the JSON packets. You can assign that to a grid, assign that to a data set, and then you can bind the data set to user interface. Or, for example, in this case, getting the different images. These are different images. I might go and do a request of that image and bind it to a T-image component in our user interface. So this REST debugger lets you play around and navigate around the different parts of an API, because each REST API, while it uses REST and it uses JSON, these parameters and the parameter names, the columns that are available, the root elements have different names, and then we can choose those. But you can look at the raw JSON that comes back, and also then just go apply, and here's all the raw JSON. So there's the response. We got an OK back, and then there's the profile, and then down here there's some images, releases. Let's see her different names. So she goes under Clarkson, K Clarkson, Kelly C. Here the URI. Here's that images that we got, different images we pulled from the response.artist.images root element in the JSON. Let's see, there's some more images, and then her real name is Kelly Breon Clarkson, so we might want to, what is that, response.artist.real name? Is that one that we can play with? Yep, there's her real name, Kelly Breon Clarkson. Again, JSON, double quotes around it. I didn't know her middle name was Breon. Again, use the REST debugger to do some testing and playing around and spelunking around the database. Then what I did is I built an application that's got an edit box where I can put in a name, a root element, artist, rep artist.profile. I've got two memos here, one that's going to get the JSON content, the full JSON content, and then a root element, which is this artist profile down here in memo 2. I start with the REST client component, and that goes out to API Discogs. The REST request is the request down here, which is a artist slash and then a parameter with in curly brace. That's JSON thing, and I'm going to bind this name to that parameter. Then I'm going to get the response back, and the response for REST artist profile, so that I can assign and bind the root element contents down here in the second memo. So let's look at the binding. So here's the live binding designer. Let's move some of these out of the way. So the edit box is the text from that is going to be bound to the root element. So that'll specify the parameter, which is the name of the artist for that root element. And then for the JSON value that comes back, I'm going to get that from the JSON value of whatever is selected inside of the response from my REST call. And the request has the edit box that sets the parameters name that I need. The other memo text is going to come from the contents, right, which is the contents of the artist profile, this root element that I set by pointing it to the JSON value here and to the root element here. So if I compile and run this application on Windows or Macintosh or whatever, click the execute button. Here's all the JSON that comes back for Kelly Clarkson. And then here's it using the root element, their profile. So here's all the text. We can read all of that, maybe print it, put it somewhere. Did this earlier. Let's try Jimi Hendrix. And again, execute it. And then we should get the JSON. And down here is the information about Jimi Hendrix and his profile. And again, we can change these to whatever the root element might be. Images, I guess, was the other one. So here we've got the response coming, and here's all the different images that they have on this site to get Jimi Hendrix images and do something with them, for example. So that's how easy it is to now build an application running on a mobile platform, running on a desktop platform, using these components. These are non-visual controls. They can be used in your VCL Windows application. They can be used in your Windows desktop, your Macintosh desktop, and in your iOS and Android applications. Of course, I might, on an iOS device or an Android phone, I might put these response memos on separate tabs and let me use a gesture to move between them. That's one of the things when you think about, okay, do I want this look on a small screen? Maybe if I was on a tablet in landscape mode, this would all fit. But these are the things to think about, and you can create different forms for different targets, and you can decide to use tabs, you can decide to use grids, or whatever else it might be when you're building your desktop applications versus your mobile applications. That's for you, the application designer, to do. Let's close this and look at a few other examples. We've mapped common controls that you might use. For example, a calendar edit control. We've mapped those to the native controls underneath on the different target platforms that you're building for. So again, we go over here in our target platforms and say, let's run this application on our iOS device. So we'll compile it and build it. It all gets built in the Windows IDE. The app bundle is sitting in a subdirectory under the iOS subfolder under your project, and it's there, and you can grab it and copy it over. It's now deploying the application and all the different icons over to our to the iOS device, and so we'll see this application start up here in a moment over on my iPhone 4S. So here's the date picker icon just showed up, and then we'll see the splash screen. iOS apps have splash screens. We specify a bitmap. I'll show you how you do that in a moment. And then if I go into pick a date, then I get the iOS 7 look of pick a date. So here's the little spinners, and they kind of float away. If I was on iOS 6, you'd see more of a dark style odometer kind of application. When we're done, then it gets a date change, and that date change, we use the format date time function to get us the day of the week, the month, the day, and the year of the date that we picked. Let's go back to the IDE, and let's set Android as our target platform. Instead of the emulator, I'm going to choose my Samsung Galaxy S4, and I'm going to build and deploy this application for Android. We'll switch over to that little view application. We can also see the deployment happening. It's deploying. Again, this is going through VNC to a VNC server, so you'll see some refresh scan lines go by. Here's the APK file. It's installing it on my Android Samsung Galaxy S4. And then I'll sit here and just wait a moment as it sends it through the USB cable, and we'll play with it. So here it comes, and there's the pick a date. So let's choose it. This is the Android look for date, the day, month, and year. And when we're done, click the set button. Then it says I picked Tuesday, May 12, 2015. Same project, same source code, same form design, just changing the different target, rebuilding the application, either app bundle, executable, or APK. We can go to the target platform in this case and add a platform. Let's add 32-bit Windows. Let's compile and run this on Win32. Here's the date picker. Here's the calendar. That's the Windows calendar edit. And we can choose it and then come back and we're done and we've got the date, right? Same code running on Windows, Android, iOS device, iOS simulator. The iOS simulator is an Intel-based executable that gets built, and the simulator, let's just build for the simulator if you haven't seen it before, and it'll switch over to the Macintosh when it's done compiling. It deploys it. Here, it'll start up the simulator. There's the splash screen, and again, pick a date, and here's that iOS simulator. We can also set the target for the simulator to iPad, iPhone, iPhone 5, for example, and go from there. Now, how does all this work? Again, under the covers, right mouse click and bring up the connection profile. Connection profile lets you specify a remote computer that you're going to connect to, either a remote 32-bit or 64-bit Windows. Might be building a Windows Server application or a SOAP server or OS 10. The IP address, again, of my server, that's over here, and it's 20.161. We can test to make sure it's alive. This allows the IDE to talk to a remote platform. The second part is the SDK manager. The SDK manager, we specify our different targets. You can click the add button, select a platform that you want, select the profile, and then select the SDK version. So in this case, I've got iOS 7 as SDK, Android SDK 22, 32-bit, Macintosh OS 10 SDK, and here is the information about where all the files are. So for Android, here's where the libraries are, where the NDK, where the Java SDK is, where the signing of the APK tool is, where the debugger location is, ADB, and so on. And the same thing on iOS and Android. We find out here's where all the libraries are, so that we can have the different frameworks that FM and our system RTL needs to connect to over on the OS 10 side. And if you need to add, let's say you installed some new device and you added some extra libraries that came with it, then you can always go in and click this button and add the path on the remote machine and the files that you need to add, including subdirectories, and then it'll add other frameworks that you might need or other libraries that you might need because you plugged in some kind of scanning device, one of those bricks you plug in where you can swipe credit cards. That'll come with a set of libraries and the device itself, versus if it's already part of the Apple OS 10 or iOS operating system, which most likely isn't, and you can take care of that. Now, how do we deploy applications? Project deployment, you can use this window for either iOS or Android, and you can add other files. Now we have our feature files, which are interface to go, interface client, some of the drivers, Midas if you're using client data set. You can also click this button to add any other files. Maybe you need a reg key, maybe you need an INI file, some JPEG files, maybe an MP3 or a movie file that you want as part of your application. You can add all those, and then when you say build and deploy, anything that is in the deployment list of files, both the local file name and path, and then where you want it to appear on the remote device, whether it's an Android platform or an iOS device platform, you can set the remote paths. It will then copy those files into the right places when it sends the bundle over, and then when the code starts up, and we'll look at the source code project, there's a unit that's used first called startup copy. And what startup copy will do is read all the information that says, here's all the different files, the bitmaps, the icons, any other files that are needed for your application, and it will copy them into the right places based on the deployment information that ultimately gets put into the right place as part of your app bundle. Info plist on iOS, manifest XML over on an Android device. Let's look at a few more examples. Notifications are available both in iOS and Android. In exe4, we had a notification class. Now in exe5, we have a notification component where you can set the icon badge number. On iOS, that would show up as a number on top of the icon of your application, or whatever you set that to, 5 or something like that. On Android, when you get the notification, you'll see that value as part of the notification that is up at the top. And then we have a couple buttons here. One, send schedule notification, and other one, send notification immediately, cancel a schedule, or cancel all notifications. So cancel all notification just uses that notification component and calls the cancel notification for whatever string ID you gave the notification. And if it was cancel all and it's supported on the platform, then we just call cancel all. To create a notification, schedule. Let's use this button, send schedule notification. First, let's see if notifications are supported. And if they are, then we'll create a notification of type T notification. We'll give it a name, my notification. We'll give it the alert body property, and that's just a string, and we'll set a number, the badge number, to 10, for example, here. And we'll set the fire date property. The fire date property takes a T-date time. So this one does now, which is the current time, and then uses encode time, which takes hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. So this is saying set the fire date to 10 seconds from now, and then use the notification components, schedule notification, passing this notification class to it. And then if the notification isn't supported or some exception happens, then we want to dispose of the notification that we created up here. The only difference between sending in the future and sending now is if the time is now or earlier, 10 years from 10 years ago or whatever, that'll just fire immediately. All right. So let's build this application on Android. And while I'm here, before I do that, I wanted to mention the design environment when you're building your applications. And the design environment has an option here for choosing what your application is going to look like at design time. But again, that has nothing to do with what it's going to look like at runtime. It's going to look at runtime whatever your target device is, right? iPad, Galaxy Tab, iPhone, iPhone 5C, whatever. It just gives you an orientation at design time for what it's going to look like. So for iOS 7, it's got this kind of nice flat light blue look. iOS 6, it's got that darker gray rounded rectangles for buttons and so on.
Again, this is just design time to orient you what it's going to look like if you're in landscape versus portrait mode. I've got a Galaxy S4, what it's going to look like, Nexus 4, what it's going to look like, and so on. And you can create custom layouts as well. Say Tools option, and go down here, Form Designer, Device Manager, and you can add your own. Put a device background, set the upper left-hand corner, set the width and height of the screen. If you want a status, if it has a status bar, is it at the top? Is it at the bottom? Is it the left or right, depending on the device? And then you could save all of that, and it shows up here, and it would then be selectable in this list. So this is just a representation at design time, so you know where the client area is, where you can put things like put a toolbar and align it to the top, put a label in the toolbar, align it to the client area or contents of the toolbar, have a toolbar at the bottom, put some buttons on it, and so on, 2-speed buttons maybe, for example. So the combination of layouts, alignments, and anchors allow you to control the look and feel of your application on all the different form factors of the devices. So alignments, anchors, and so on. Now, people often ask me, is there also a way to build custom looks for forms and not have to do it by writing a bunch of code? And the answer is yes. Each form has a property called form factor, where you can specify, is it a desktop form, a phone form, a tablet form, what its height is, what orientations you want to support, portrait, landscape, inverted portrait, inverted landscape, and what its width might be. And then there's this other property called form family. If you put a string in there like main, and if I create another form in my application, so if I go up here and say add new FireMonkey mobile form and HD, and I have a different form that maybe I want to be oriented different, have some different buttons. Let's just put a button on this one in the middle. And we set this form's form factor to something different. Maybe set it to that it's a tablet, for example, and then set the orientation and put the form family to main. Is that what I called the other one? You're supposed to remember that, David. Let's go back to the other form. I might have said main form. Let's see. No, I just put main. If you do this and you have two forms in your project, then what gets generated by the ID in your main program is it will create both the forms. Make sure they're both auto-create forms. That's up here in project options forms. I've got them both as auto-create forms. Then by setting the form family, it adds this line, register form family, the name of the string, and the array of forms. So here's my two forms. Then at runtime, when your application starts up, it hits here and FireMonkey will see which of these forms matches closely the device you're running it on. And then it'll launch the correct form as part of your application. So just a little bit more about how we orient ourselves to a multi-device world and in our applications. The other thing we can do is under project options, if it's an iOS platform, then we can go to application. We can set our own bitmaps for all our icons and our splash screen or launch image, it's called, for iPhone and iPad, all the resolutions supported. We can also custom set the orientation to override any of the other things that we've done. You can set that. I just only want this application to run in portrait, for example. And I can do the same thing for Android. I can set the launcher icon, which is all there is. There's no splash screen in Android. If you want one, put a form in your app, put a timer on it, let it run for a couple seconds to display something, and then when it ends, show the real main form. That's one way. That's one way to do it. You can also set orientation, custom orientation. Remember, your version information is here. On Android, we have all these access permissions that you have to set. So if your application is going to use certain things, if it's going to use cameras, if it's going to use the internet, if it's going to use vibration, if it's going to use SMS or MMS, NFC, Bluetooth, if it's going to do some lower level advanced permissions like run a hardware test, and so on, those are the advanced options. You set all of these, the ones that you want in your application. For iOS, there aren't any permissions that way. We just have some version information like what's the UI device family you want to tell iTunes, the App Store, that your application supports, either iPhone only, iPad only, or iPhone and iPad. And you also have, again, the version information that's available for setting the version number. If you want to include version number build as part of the project, do you want to have it auto-generate on every build or auto-increment on every build? A lot of options there, and all that is used as part of the deployment of your application. So let's go over to our Android device, and let's bring up the send cancel notifications. This one, I was playing around with this yesterday, so it may or may not work. Let's send a notification immediately, and notice at the top I just got that notification. And if I pull down my notifications, here is my send cancel notifications with the number 10 is what I put in it. Delphi Mobile is here. If I click on the notification, I'm back in my application. All right. And then schedule notification 10 seconds later, the notification will show up. Let's go to IB Lite. If you want to do development on the local device, you know, the Android device, the iOS device, and you want to do some database operations, you have locally, you have two choices with XE5. SQLite is included in iOS and Android. SQLite is also included in Mac OS X, and you can download it and put into your path SQLite 32 and 64-bit on your Windows targets as well. So this application has a list view to display tasks. It's got a toolbar, and inside of the toolbar, it's got a label, and that's this title here, IB Lite. That's aligned to the contents area. I've got two buttons. They're aligned to the top and left of the label, so that way they're sitting as part of the contents that's aligned to the toolbar. We could have put these buttons in the toolbar and aligned them left and right, but you want to make sure in this case that whatever label you have, there's still room for the buttons, depending on how large the label is. So we parent these buttons to the label, and then we align the contents of all of that to the toolbar, and it all fits nicely. In order to support and have things look great on different form factors of phones and tablets in different orientations, landscape, portrait, and so on, you'll start using alignments, you'll start using layouts, and you'll start using anchors to anchor different buttons in different parts of the user interface so they look great in portrait or landscape mode. You also have the option to fix or, in a sense, lock the orientation. You can do that in a couple ways. The form factor, I can set what orientations I want to support on a form by form basis, portrait, landscape, inverted, portrait, inverted, landscape. Under project options, application, there's also a tab for iOS and Android called orientation. And here you can set a custom orientation. Maybe you just want to lock your application to only run in portrait mode, for example, and not change if the user tries to rotate it around. Same thing for iOS. There's the icons for the application, the launch image, the splash screen that is, the spotlight search icons. We have these fire monkey flames, but you can put your own for all the resolutions of iOS devices, iPhone and iPad. Then you can go to orientation, again, lock the orientation into one specific or a couple different specific places there. We also have version information. That's where you can specify your major, minor version number. On Android, for example, if you bump the version number and you already have a project of the same name, if it's the same version number, it'll uninstall it and install the new version. If you have a different version number, it won't uninstall it. It'll add a new version of that application, but preserve the data that you have so you can continue building, testing. And then if it's an iOS device target, you can also set the UI device family to iPhone, iPad, iPhone only, iPad only. That's information that will be used in the iTunes store to find your app based on the user selecting a filter to show, for example, just show me iPad apps. I don't care about iPhone apps. You can set other options, the development region, things of that kind. And up here, the major, minor, and build version number. You have an option here to auto-generate build numbers, auto-increment build numbers, build after build after build. So all of that's, the version info's been there for a while, but it plays out really nicely when we're going to all these different platforms and devices. Now, this is using FireDAC, and it's talking to Interbase, and it's going to access a database. And the table we have is the task table. We can do inserts and queries. So let's look at the insert query. Insert query says insert into the task table for the column task name a parameterized value. We're going to pass it a string, then we're going to execute the SQL query. Same thing for delete. It's going to be the SQL property is delete from task, where task name, the name of the column, equals some parameterized value that we're going to pass using code here in a moment. We've got a delete button and an add button. The add button on click event is going to bring up this dialog, and it's called input query, and it's defined inside of the FMX dialogues unit. It takes a caption, a prompt, and a value, and it returns true or false if we hit OK versus cancel for the input query. So enter new task, here's the prompt, here's the variable. If I want to pass 2 or 3 inputs into input query, I would put an array of prompts here and an array of variables that are going to receive the values. And again, I end up with true or false if I hit OK or cancel. Then, since this was the input add button, we're going to set the insert query param by name, the task name parameter, as a string. We're going to get that task name variable, which is defined up here as a string. We're going to execute the SQL and call refresh of the table, which will fill in the list view from the database of all the elements that take place. If we have some problem, then we've got an exception handler that'll produce an interface. For the delete button click, in this case, we're going to select something in the list view, and if we select an item in the list view, then the delete button is going to appear. We're going to set the parameter by name, task name again for that task name, which was taken from the text property of the selected list view, exec SQL, and call refresh. How do we get the database over to the device? I go to project deployment, and we've got the task GDB. It happens to be in the project example. And then I'm going to, on Android, I'm going to put that in the remote path ./assets/internal. And on iOS device, I'm going to put that database into startup, capital S, capital U, \D, documents /. I also need to provide my IB Lite key. When you get exe5, we give you an unlimited deploy, unlimited IB Lite registration key, license key, and you deploy that as part of your application, and then your application is licensed to use IB Lite. You can sell millions of them. You can use that same key in lots of different applications. The only limitations are 100 megabyte GDB file size and only 1 transaction active at a time, where you can do a commit and rollback. If you need more transactions live at a time, if you need bigger than 100 megabyte, if you want encryption at the database, table, and column level, you can contact our sales office and you can get licenses for Interbase to Go, which is a static library that'll get linked in, which is full Interbase as part of your application. Full ANSI SQL 92 in this Interbase to Go, encryption, again, at the database table and column level, all the way up to AES, advanced encryption, 256-bit. You know, if you're putting data on a device, you might want to protect it, encrypt it. And so Interbase to Go is a great way, and you contact our sales office, you get a number of licenses for the number of apps you're going to deploy. But IB Lite is free, and it's available for you to use. And so I put the reg key into into startup documents, Interbase, and then let's move this out a little bit. License, that's the subdirectory there. And then we put the database just in startup documents. In the code, for the person who built this, they have a set of code here that says before we connect, so let's go back to the user interface for the task connect button. There's an event here before connect. So we've hooked that event. And if we're on iOS or Android, we're going to set the database property of the connection equal to tpath.getDocuments. These are defined in IO utils unit. So getDocuments path will get me the correct documents path for whatever my target platform is. And it'll give me the right delimiter at the end, plus path delim. And then I just add the string of the name of my database. Remember, it's case sensitive on iOS and Android, so I need, the name is task.gdb, all uppercase, I put that in there. So that'll set the database, and then I set the username and password, whatever that might be, or maybe there's a prompt, an input query that you use in your user interface. So this is how we can write our code for different platforms when we have to deal with some of the differences between iOS and Android. We could always say if Android, then put /assets/internal /task.gdb as a whole string. But these built-in functions that are part of the IO utils unit, then that will make our lives much simpler, so that we don't have to think about what platform we're on, other than if-defing around that code. The other way is we could do before connect, instead of an if-def, you can use the TOS version record structure to get the operating system you're running on. You could call system information. We have an example for that to see that you're running on iOS or OS 10 or Android or Win32 or Win64, what processor you're running on, and so on. There's many different ways to protect yourself, so you can use the same source code across multiple targets. Okay, so let's go over to our iOS device, and let's bring up the IB Lite example that I built earlier. Here it is. So here's the IB Lite. Here we'll add a button, and let's say this is sleep, and then let's add another, eat. Then if I select one, all of a sudden the delete button's there, and then I can also select and delete the other one. I'll come back in and do something like work, which is what well, this is really play for me, so it's not a big deal. I can close the application and come back in tomorrow, and the database will be there with the data that's in it. And if I was connected to a remote server, I could persist the data out using data snap or whatever mechanism from my mobile device to maybe the enterprise version of Interbase. The nice thing about IB Lite is it's the same file format, the same metadata, the same ANSI SQL 92, the same GDB file, whether you're using a huge Interbase server, Interbase desktop, Interbase developer edition, which we give you. All of that is available. It's the same Interbase all across all the platforms for Interbase XE3. Now let's go over to Android and choose the app. Again, it's the IB Lite app. So here's some data from earlier today: eat, work. I should add sleep because it's been a long day. Now it's got the Android look and feel. It's got the Android virtual keyboard, and I can add sleep and click OK. And now I've got data. Here's work. Hit delete. Notice it has the look and feel of Android as opposed to iOS, either iOS 6 or iOS 7. So the delete button doesn't have color. It's got a little X and it's got text. Everything in FireMonkey, of course, you can create your own custom styles for buttons to override whatever the default style on each of the devices is. That's your choice as a developer. We have, again, mobile code snippets for all sorts of functionality, including SQLite, both using DB Express and using FireDeck. Let me bring up the location example. Location example uses the location sensor component with FireMonkey. It's using a switch to activate and deactivate the location sensor. And then by turning on the location sensor, we're going to get latitude and longitude. Down here, we've got the T-Web browser component. It has a URL property, so we'll fill in the URL property, and we'll tell the web browser component to navigate to a page, in this case using Google Maps to give us the look and feel of the app, or the location in a map of where we are currently. I'm here in Scotts Valley, California. The code behind this is pretty straightforward. Most of the codes actually appear. The rest of these event handlers are taking the input from the buttons that are there and setting properties of the location sensor. For example, the distance is the number of meters that will trigger an on-location change. Sometimes GPS drifts a little bit, but if you only want to get updated events firing every 2 meters, every 1 meter, every half meter, or all the time, if you put 0 in there, then there's a lot of buttons in the user interface for the number boxes here for setting the trigger distance accuracy in these plus minus to increment and decrement. Otherwise, the real work is getting the longitude and latitude from the sensor, and then navigating to the map. In the location sensor, its event is on location changed. So we'll double click, and we've got a constant string here which says let's use Google Maps. And we're going to pass 2 strings for the latitude and longitude, and then we're going to get back the map tiles from Google. On this location changed event, we're past the old location and the new location as T location coordinate 2D. That's the latitude and longitude as 2 floating point numbers. When it comes in, I'll display in the label text the latitude and longitude. I'll specify the new location dot latitude, and we'll use the string helper function to convert that floating point to a string, which is what we want. And the same thing for longitude. So we can also take the latitude and longitude, and we've got a tgeocoder class that will geocode latitude, longitude, and also reverse geocode. So we can pass it a civic address, for example, and get the latitude and longitude from an address, or vice versa. Given a latitude and longitude, we can get the city, the country, the street, so you can explore that. We have an example in the FireMonkey samples for that that gives you that kind of information. And finally, we're going to call the navigate method of the web browser using the format function, passing it that string that's up there, and then passing in an array 2 of the string variables of the string for latitude and longitude, which will get substituted up there. Let's go over to the Android version, and let's bring up the location app. On my Galaxy S4, I'll turn on the location sensor. So when that happens, it'll trigger an on location change. Now I'll get the latitude and longitude either from Wi-Fi or GPS, and there's my Google map, and that's where we are here in Scotts Valley, just off Highway 17, the Santa Cruz Highway that heads over the hill to San Jose, and you go 6 miles south and you run into the Pacific Ocean in Monterey Bay. So there's a simple app. I did an example with 1 line of code where I just turned on the location sensor, and I had 1 line of code, web browser navigate. I put the string in here, passed it the new location, latitude, longitude. 1 line of user-written code to map and display the latitude and longitude. Let's go back over to our iOS device and run the same application. And again, the same look now. It's got the FireMonkey splash screen or your own splash screen here. There's the sensor, and it's an iOS 7 look. The switch, we'll turn it on. It'll give us latitude and longitude. And again, it brings up the Google Maps, and it should show that we're somewhere in Scotts Valley. It might fire a couple times. We could always change the trigger distance to something else. And then eventually it'll settle down and get us, and there we are in Scotts Valley. I'm actually at 5617, but it said I was at 5619. Okay, that's close enough. I know where I am in the world. So let's bring up 2 more, and then I'm going to switch over to another machine here for a couple minutes. This shows you how we can use actions and gestures. It's called tab sliding. It's one of the samples that we give you. We've got a tab control that has 2 tab items, tab item 1 and 2. Tab item 1 has this FireMonkey logo on it. Tab item 2 has this little flame bitmap on it. And what we're going to do is use actions and gesture to be able to move right and left, and then cause the tabs to move by doing the gesture. So we have actions. Let's bring up the action list. There's a category called tab, and the tab actions we've hooked are change tab action previous and change tab action next. That's the name we gave them. There are other standard actions that are in exe5. There's navigation actions for a database binding. There's file exit. There's bring up a virtual keyboard. There's take photo from library, take photo from action, show share sheet action. We'll see that in a moment. Here's that tab change action, view action, window close, phone dial action. These are pre-built functionality you can use in your application. You can always create your own actions as well. Put code and then call the execute method of your action to do things. You can assign actions to user interface elements as reusable event handlers or action code. So what does a tab change action do? Let's click on one. This is named the tab change action previous. We can give it whatever name we want. It has a tab property, where we can specify which tab we want to have once the action take place, the tab we want it moved to. And you have a transition property here where you can specify either do a slide transition or just have it appear, have no transition, just have the next tab flash up. There's an event handler on update when we are going to change the tab. And let's go look at the code that's associated with changing a tab. And in fact, it's the same code that's used for both previous and next tab. And it says if the tab control tab index is less than the maximum number of tab items we have in the tab, then we're going to set the action tab property for the change tab action. We're going to set that equal to the next tab in the tabs array of the tab control. So tab control tab index plus 1. If we're at the last tab in our tab control, then we'll just return nil. We'll set nil tab, which will tell the tab action there's nothing else to do, just leave it where it is. Same thing, we'll reuse this tab action event handler. If we get a tab action previous and we're not at the beginning, if we're somewhere else more than the first tab, then we're going to take the tabs array of the current tab index minus 1, and we're going to get that tab and store that in the change tab action previous is tab property. Otherwise, we'll set nil, which means we're at the first tab and there's no other tabs to deal with. Now, this code works whether there's 2 tabs, 10 tabs, 4 tabs, depending on the platform. Apple says if there are tab items at the bottom, you should only have 4, and if you have to have a 5th one, that should be a more ... or just ... If they're dots, then I can just tab through like crazy. There's really no limit. Or I could have program control move from tab to tab to tab. So what I'm going to do is go into the tab control, and I'm going to bring up the items editor, and I'm going to add another tab item. Now I have 3. And I'm going to put on that 3rd tab, we can go over here and select it. There's the first one, there's the second one. This is the 3rd one. We'll put a T label down, and that can be label, and we'll just call it, let's just change the text. This is tab item 3, okay? And make it a little bigger and put it in the middle. And then we can set the text align property to be centered, so it's kind of centered in the area. So that's on tab action 3. Now, how do we hook the gestures in? We drop a gesture manager down. Gesture manager has been with us since Delphi 2009, C++ Builder 2009, when we added gestures for touch-based Windows 7-based applications. And we've got our action list. So let's look at the gesture manager. The gesture manager doesn't have anything special. There's no events, but we can assign gesture managers, 1 or more, to different parts of our user interface. So in this case, the gesture manager is associated with the tab control, because that's where we're going to manipulate things. So we look at the touch property, and it's got the gesture manager hooked in. We can look at gestures that we have, and there's a set of standard gestures, 32 standard gestures, a left, right, up, down, alt, curly Q, circle, chevron, scratch out, double curly Q, triangle. You get a visual representation of what the gesture will look like, either by using the mouse and the left mouse button on Windows, or 2-finger touch on the trackpad on Macintosh OS X, or the track mouse, or the track external trackpad. And there's also interactive gestures where you can do zoom, pan, rotate, 2-finger tap, press and tap, long tap, and double tap. Those you can hook as well. I'm going to add 2 other gestures. I want up and down, and I want those to do the same things as left and right. So for up, I'll associate the tab action next, and for down, I'll associate tab action previous. Or again, I could create a new standard action or choose a standard action. But these 2 work well for me. That way it'll make it easier for the user. They don't have to worry about, are they up, down, left, right to move around. Let's make sure that our tab control is active tab property is set to the first tab, because we want it to come up there. You could also, in the on-form create event, you could set the active tab of the tab control equal to tab item 1. If you forgot and left the active tab as some other tab, at least it would always start at the beginning. And let's go and compile it for my device. So here's our app. There's the FireMonkey logo. If I gesture left, I go to the second. Gesture left, I go to the third. Gesture right, And I turn on the little indicator here. That's an Android setting on the device, so you can see where the touch point is. I'm moving to the right, I'm gesturing to the left, and there we go. If I do a gesture up, then I go to the next one, gesture down, go to the previous gesture down, because I hooked those two in. Now I'm at the beginning. And it did the tab slide animation. So there's, on Android, the tab sliding app using gestures and actions together. Same thing over on my iOS device. We do the exact same thing. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the design environment is this design is really the area of the client of your device or target that you're going to see and manipulate. This is just at design time. Ultimately, it's going to be when you pick the target device and its form factor. But you can, through the sliding form, again, go to the form factor, set the devices you want this form to work with, a desktop phone or tablet. You can set the orientations that you want supported. You can set the height and width. You can also create multiple forms for different form factors in your application. And if you do that and you want several different main forms and one of them to come up depending on the device you deploy your application to, you can create those main forms, set the form family property to a string like main, and then as long as you name them the same string across all the forms, then when the application starts up on the different platforms, it will choose the right main form to bring up based on several factors: what device you choose, height and width that fits approximately the best fit for each of those platforms. So there's lots of ways to that. You could write your own code at startup time that queries what operating system you're on, what device you're on, and then just say whatever the name of that form is, call it show method. We've always had the ability to say project options, forms, and have either auto create forms or available forms. So auto create forms, the first one that you have will be the main form, and then others are auto created. You could also have available forms that are sitting there in your application, but they're waiting for you to create an instance of them and call their show method. So everything is possible, both in user interface elements and different form factors. Also, you have all the choices on Android for setting permissions of your application, like it's going to use the phone, it's going to use the camera, it's going to use the internet. All of these are passed in the manifest file as part of the APK, so that when the user installs your application, before they install, they can see a list of everything that your app wants to do when it's running on your device on Android. On iOS, it'll pop up when you try to use something like location or accessing the camera or whatever, saying, hey, this app wants to do this, you want to set OK. You can also go in the settings and permissions and set all of that in advance for your apps. And there's a bunch of these different permissions. There's even advanced permissions that work more down at the file system and frame buffers and hardware levels and operating system level. In Android, if you don't check some of these and you try to do something, then it just won't work. So if you, for example, you've built an internet app and it's working on iOS, but it's not working on Android. Oh, let's go to share sheet real quick. This is 2 lines of code to access the camera and to share the bitmap you take from the camera with the applications on your device that know how to deal with bitmaps. So here's the action list. I've got a couple actions, a share sheet action and a take photo from camera action. Take photo from camera action has a did cancel taking photo, did finish taking photo. So I've got an event handler for did finish taking photo. And then on the show share sheet, before executing the show share sheet, I want to hook an event. And let's look at the 2 lines of user written code. The take photo from camera action, if that did finish, meaning you said use or OK or select and save that bitmap, then you're past an image bitmap. And then what we're going to do is we're going to assign that image that came from the camera to an image that's on the user interface of our application. So that's this image here. It's image camera picture of type T image. So image camera picture bitmap assign this bitmap. The show share sheet action before execute is going to take the bitmap of the image from the form and it's going to assign it to the share sheet action bitmap. So here's 1 line, 2 line of user code. The rest was generated by the IDE and selection of actions and so on. So let's take a look at this example on iOS first. here's the share sheet app. I'll take a picture. I can choose which camera. That's the camera facing towards my computer. You'll see it there. There it's there and going on. We'll take that picture, and then we can retake it or close the app. We can say use photo. Oh, we get a post from Warren Postma on the Google Plus group. Cool. Then that is in my share sheet and the image of my application. I'll click share, and now it'll find all the apps that I've given permission or that know how to deal with bitmaps. Facebook, post it to Twitter, email it, send it through SMS, sign it to a contact, copy it to the camera roll, and print it. If I've got a wireless printer connected, that knows how to print. I can hit cancel and close. Same thing over on Android. So here comes the share sheet app. We got a camera, so we'll say take photo, same source code, just using the actions. Of course, linked with different runtime to deal with cameras on Android devices. Take photo. There's the desktop again, and let's take a picture. And oh, it's in that mode. Let's save it, and then we can share it. So here's the share sheet and all the apps that know how to do something with bitmaps over here on my Android device. Google Plus, put it on Facebook, email it, send it somehow through Bluetooth, and so on. Post it on Picasa and such. So again, all of these are there, 2 lines of code to take a picture, either the forward-facing, backward-facing camera, flash on, flash off, all of that, all in 2 lines of code. That's not too bad. Now, if you want to share enable and camera enable an app, you could take the same code into a bigger application, maybe take the image and save it in a bitmap blob of a database and still share it, maybe put it in a list of pictures in list view by name, and then select one and then do a share sheet of that bitmap. So this is my Samsung Slate Series 7 tablet hybrid. It's running Core i5 processor. It's running Windows 8.1. See, I've got the little new icon down there, and I have it booting right to my desktop. That's very cool. What I'm doing here is I want to show you that you can also do some of this work in your VCL applications on Windows. So let me open up 2 different examples. This one is a VCL app that will display all of the sensors that are on my device. In this case, this Slate. I use the sensor manager and activate it. I use the sensor manager to get the count of sensors found, and then I iterate through and get each of the sensors in the sensor array, get their name and the category of the sensor. I'm using the get enum name, passing the type info to get the category of sensor and the name of the sensor. So let's run this application on the Samsung Slate Series 7. Everything that's in the system unit, up here you'll notice system.sensors. Anything that's in the system unit can be used in VCL and in the FM framework. So there's a lot of underpinnings technology that you can use, and I'll show you 2 examples. Here I'm going to list all the sensors. So I've got an ambient light sensor. I'm using this utility called GPS Direct, which will give me latitude and longitude either via a COM port plugged into a GPS device, or if I've got GPS built in. For example, all of the new Ultrabook-based tablets that use the Intel specification, the Intel circuit board. Intel gives you an orientation sensor, accelerometer, a GPS sensor. All of those are built in. This Samsung comes with motion, accelerometer, and orientation, magnetometer, inclinometer, and orientation sensor. So we've got 3 orientation sensors, a motion sensor, location sensor, and an ambient light sensor. Let me open up another app. This is Get Location. I also have an ambient light demo, but let's call the Get Location example. So here is a button. I define 2 variables, my location sensor array, which is of type T sensor array. Again, up here, I'm going to use the system sensors unit. I've got a string here, that same string you saw in my mobile application, to go to Google Maps and pass 2 strings for latitude and longitude. And then I activate the sensor manager. I say my location sensor array equals T sensor manager dot current sensor manager. I use the method get sensors by category, and I pass the category of sensor I'm looking for. So I want to get an array of all of this location sensors that it finds. Well, it's going to find 1. If I didn't find any location sensors, if that sensor array is nil, I'll output on the label location sensor not found. Otherwise, I'll put a caption saying location sensor found. I'll instantiate my location sensor, which is of type T custom location sensor. And then I will take the first element in the array or collection, and I'll cast it as a T custom location sensor. From there, I can then get the latitude and longitude as floating point values, and I'll call float to stir to set the locations into the captions of those two labels. And I'll stop the sensor. And since we don't have a web browser component currently for Windows and Mac, I'm going to call shell execute on Windows, and then I put an if-def around here and call the system function on Macintosh, passing it the string for the URL, and then whatever the default browser is, it will launch either Chrome or Safari or whatever, i.e. I'll pass it the latitude and longitude using the toString helper function as the two elements using the format function that will substitute in the strings for %s%s. And I also pass show normal to give a normal size versus minimized, maximized, or whatever. So let's compile and run this application, VCL app running on Windows. Click on the button, get the latitude and longitude from the simulation. The GPS Direct gives me different latitude and longitudes, and then it's going to call Google Maps with the latitude and longitude, and it's going to tell me where that is. I'm curious to see because it always gives me a different one. That looks like Murmansk or something like that. There's something way up there in northern Russia on the the Kara Sea and the Arctic Ocean way up there north. If I had my GPS device plugged in, I have a Garmin Nuvi, I could set through GPS Direct the COM port that it's plugged in, and then it would get the GPS if it got a satellite here in Scotts Valley, and I'd see the same thing. So that's how I handle similar code on the desktop. I want to load up this application. This was done by Jeff Overcash, and what he did is he took the Java-based text-to-speech that's available in Android, and he built a Delphi interface unit for it. This is available in Code Central. You can just search in Code Central for text-to-speech, Android, or Delphi Android text-to-speech, or maybe Jeff Overcash, and you'll find it. What he did is he converted the Java declaration for text-to-speech, and he created a Delphi interface unit that has all the interfaces and the types, and that they're external, they're defined somewhere else in a library, and all the interfaces and all the functions that are available for doing things like ask, is it speaking? Is it currently speaking? You don't want to send something to it. Play silence, maybe stop the speech. To speak, it takes a Java string as a parameter. And you'll notice down here, there's no implementation because all the implementation is done in the text-to-speech API and functionality that's in the Android phone itself. And then if we look at our source code, he's got in the user interface 2 buttons, and init the text-to-speech. So when you click on that, he just initializes by using the interface that using a Java class. This is our bridge between Java and Delphi. We also have an Objective-C bridge. If you're calling into the iOS API, it's called OC class. Then I can just call the function, and I can pass it whatever the parameters are needed. So here I can get my help information by hovering over init. It's going to take a context and a text-to-speech init listener, and Jeff provides all of that. And then if we go down further, we're going to have speak out, and what speak out's going to do is we're going to take the string from the memo. This is the memo here, memo 1. So we're going to take and speak out this text. What's the text? The text is convert the string to a JString for the memo.1.lines.text. And we're going to speak that text. This is a function that's built in. It's declared in Android JNI Java types, which we give you. It's how we go from Delphi to Android ourselves, passing a system string in, and it returns a JString coming back. And then we just pass memo lines. Okay. And then it will speak. So let's set this to my Android device, my Samsung Galaxy S4, and hit compile and run. So we'll say whatever's in the memo there.
Hello from a Delphi application.
Okay, so let's go. Is way cool.
This is way cool. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, so what that shows is if we don't have a component for it and we don't have an interface unit for it in Delphi, you can still call these other APIs that are available for Android. Brian Long did 2 great sessions at the recent Code Rage 8 on Thursday, the third of the 3 days. You should go watch the replays of his sessions. One was using Delphi with the iOS API, where he showed you how to get to other APIs and into the operating system from Delphi. And the one right after it is Delphi and the Android API. So he shows you how to get into Android from Delphi to do other things. And of course, over time, we'll have more interface units and more components to expose more of what's available. But there's always going to be something new or something device specific that maybe Android itself doesn't have, or you have to get a library from Samsung. For example, my Galaxy S4 has NFC support. We don't have an NFC component currently, but you can still get to it and write some code. And somebody in the community or one of our SCs will build you a component or build the wrapper to get to it. Okay, this is my Google Glass. I want to connect it to Windows 8, and we'll put it on. If you haven't seen Google Glass, look on my blog or on Jim's blog. He's got one as well. And I'm going to run this little app once it's running. You won't see me. I'll post a picture of myself. Jim's got one where he's looking, I think, in a mirror, so you can see him with Google Glass sitting there. We've got a couple apps that I built. One Jim built. It's an accelerometer app. Let me close this one. So under Glass, we've got 2. There's an accelerometer component that uses the motion sensor and a timer, and it'll just display the X, Y, and Z if the property is available for acceleration X, Y, Z, and maybe angular acceleration if it exists. You can test to see if the sensor you have has that property or not, and if it does, then you will display the values. And I did a separate one where I've got an input device. And also we can look at target platforms, Android, and see if it shows up as a target. Here's my Galaxy S4. Oh, now it's there. Now it's connected. So here's Glass connected, and we should see it as devices now. Let's turn on the screencast so we can see on the desktop. Oh, you can see it. There it is. So I'm broadcasting through my Samsung S4 to the VNC. So we'll go to our desktop. Here's my Android desktop. I've got a couple different apps. I've got my settings app, the Glass Home, which is the normal home. Let's bring up the accelerometer. That's the app that Jim built. He took the accelerometer demo that ships as a snippet. And then what you'll see is as I move my head around, you won't see me move my head, but I'm getting acceleration in X, Y, and Z, and I'm leaning forward and back. So we're getting a Z-axis acceleration as well. And then we'll close this app with a down gesture on the gesture bar. And let's go over to my other app. First, I want to make sure I've got a Bluetooth keyboard connected because this one does data entry. We'll go to the settings, Bluetooth. We'll go down to the devices. What I have is a Samsung wireless Bluetooth keyboard. So I can pair it. It's now connected. Oh, great. It's got the keyboard connected. So I can go back and back using the down gesture. And now I'll go to that Project 4 APK, because of course you have to have some projects with numbers after. So here's my edit box, button, and label. Classic Delphi app. And I will hit the tab key on the keyboard. Now I'm in my edit box, so I can type hello on my Bluetooth keyboard. Hello world. And then I'll tab over to the button, hit the enter key, and we'll watch the label get hello world. Very cool, right? I think so. But then again, I think all this stuff is cool. Let's go look at the code behind this example. Here's my Project 4. It's got an edit box, a button, and a label. And the button click event is just to take the text property of the edit box and set it equal to the text of the label. And that's what you can do by taking an Android app, using Google Glass, same code, Bluetooth keyboard, or using gestures because you have this gesture bar.
Jim, what were some of the questions that happened that you've handled here?
Let's see. So there are some questions about whether Delphi would have a text-to-speech component in a future version.
We're looking at all sorts of components to wrap all sorts of things on iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. We'll never stop. At the same time, there'll be third-party partners of ours who will also are working on components like TMS software, wall-to-wall. They have grids, they have components. TMS wraps all the native controls for iOS in native components for Delphi. And so, but then of course that means if you build with those components, you're building an application for iOS, right? Specific. Versus if you use the FM components, then they work on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. We make sure they work.
So here's another question. What's the minimum version of Delphi XE5 to develop apps on all platforms?
To develop mobile or develop for all platforms?
I'm guessing for mobile and desktop both.
So if you buy Delphi only Pro, then you get Windows and Mac support. If you want mobile, then we have a mobile add-on pack. If you buy Delphi Enterprise and above, you get Data Snap and you get mobile. If you buy C++ Builder Pro, we have a mobile add-on pack for iOS, C++ iOS. If you have Enterprise and above, you get mobile. If you buy RAD Studio Pro, you get Delphi and C++ and mobile and Windows and OS X. So RAD Studio Pro would get you all the platforms, but no Data Snap, no remote SQL database access. You could always buy the client server add-on pack. Actually, RAD Studio Enterprise would get you everything. It would also get you all the database tools between now and the end of the year.
So here's a question: how to make a REST server without Data Snap to connect to from the REST client components?
I would use the TID HTTP component that comes with Project Indy. We have 200 or 300 components at the socket and at the TCP and HTTP level. So you could always create a TID HTTP server, put that component down, and then do some work yourself. That'd be one way. You could create a SOAP server, but if you want a REST server, yeah, people have done that, and then you still have access to all of the JSON stuff that we have, and then and you can build REST clients that talk to it.
So there were some questions about printing from mobile devices, and I pointed out that the share sheet usually will expose print functionality, but we don't have a print component available yet.
There is a low-level printer class that's around, and you can do that, but we don't have a print a PDF, print an image, print a document, print a whatever. But there is a T-Printer class, which is a low-level class that hooks into the printing APIs on different platforms. Otherwise, we also include Fast Report by the Fast Report folks that lets you design reports and then has the support for sending them wherever the operating system lets you send them, or save them to PDF if you've got Windows installed or whatever.
Here's a question about using the orientation to make it only portrait. Is that correct?
So you can constrain the orientation if you want. If you want your app only to come up in portrait mode, no matter if the user tries to turn the device, whether it's a tablet or a phone or a slate or whatever, or an Ultrabook, you can always decide if you want to hook using the orientation sensor to do something special in your application as well. But you can constrain or not constrain your application. Again, that's where if you want your forms to look nice in all the orientations, use a combination of layouts, anchors, and alignments, and or use form families.
And so by assigning the form factor orientation, then you can say that form will only show in the portrait orientation. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's one of the form factor properties, is to choose the orientations you want for each different device and create separate forms for each of those devices. We give you all the options. The other way is to write some code to test what orientation you're in, what type of device you're on, what its client area is, and generate your forms dynamically if you want, or fix them up if you want. You have every possibility in code and in the designers on all the platforms.
So here's a question about how to use the multi-resolution property to work with different mobile device resolutions.
So again, built into all FM applications, we build in the resolution support, the style support is all built in. So if you have, if you're running on a standard resolution iOS device versus a Retina, we get the right styles and we do the right thing. Same thing on Android. We support all 4 resolutions: 1 time, 1.5 time, 2 time, 3 time on Android. And if future devices come out with different resolutions, we'll provide that in the runtime library and in the components and in the classes. If you want to control it directly, you can set the client height and width, and you can also use the height and width properties of the form factor property that is on a form.
So now with the multi-resolution bitmaps, if they provide a multiple resolutions of the same bitmap, then it'll just select the one that's appropriate for the current screen density. Is that how that works?
That's correct. We give you styles. We give you standard, and in our custom premium styles, we give you those bitmap styles in all the resolutions for iOS and Android, and those get linked in into your application on iOS, Android, Windows, Mac. Yep.
So there's questions if the source code will be available. Now, most of it is the what's shipped with XE5, but some of the stuff is not shipped with XE5.
Yeah, some of the stuff I'll do a blog post as a follow-on to this webinar, and probably tomorrow, and I will put the links to the VCL sensors and my little rest thing, other things that don't ship with the product. Most of what I showed today ships with the product. Or is in Code Central already, like the employee directory, multi-device, multi-platform, data snap. That was taken from Stephen Ball's Code Rage 8 talk, so I'll find the link to where that is and put that in my blog post as well. Yes, all of that.
So the question, if it's possible to log into a data snap server using Active Directory.
You would have to. We don't have an Active Directory component currently. Marco Cantu is looking at the next generations of data snap support, but data snap comes with authentication and authorization, and you could have a login method that you would define in your data snap server, and that login could then on the client side ask for the right username, password, whatever it is, and then the login method that you would provide could do whatever it needs to do. Could go to Active Directory, to go to some other way that you do authentication of users. Pavel Glovatsky and his Delphi Labs on DataSnap covers everything you can do with authentication authorization, including you can use attributes to define which user types, using a role-based naming mechanism, which users have, which applications have access to which methods and which functionality in your DataSnap server. So all that is possible with DataSnap, including logging in and doing some validation, including encryption. We use encryption. We have filters for compression and encryption as examples. But if you need higher levels of encryption, maybe you would use the Windows Crypto API, or you use some other library that does cryptography. But again, Marco Cantu is looking at enhancements. I would love to have an Active Directory authentication component that I would just drop into my DataSnap server and into my DataSnap client. Absolutely, I would love that.
What are the options to deploy a DataSnap server on the cloud? Are there any platform as a service solutions?
So your DataSnap servers written in Delphi and C++ Builder can run in Windows Server. So I have some DataSnap servers as demos running in my Amazon instance in AWS. It's a Windows micro instance. It's Windows Server. It cost me 4 cents an hour. You could also put your DataSnap servers in Microsoft Azure or any other cloud system rack space that lets you have Windows instances. On our roadmap, we have Linux Server as the thing that R&D is pursuing after we finish a bunch of iOS and Android work and Windows work and so on, and VCL work. On the list is Linux Server, and that's specifically so that you could build DataSnap servers and deploy them to Linux machines. Nothing about Linux Desktop for now, but Linux Server is definitely on our roadmap for being able to deploy DataSnap servers to other kinds of systems. We do have Cloud API unit that's available and has been since XE3, and that lets you get at S3, the storage elements of Amazon, and Windows Azure
queues, or sorry, messages, tables, and blobs, and the same thing on Amazon. So we have some cloud storage API that's there. Look at the cloud unit. But you can take your DataSnap servers for Windows and put them wherever Windows runs in the cloud and get to them.
Is there options for deploying straight from the IDE to the cloud?
There isn't specifically. Oh, there was at a time. I have to go back and look. There was a time where we could deploy to Amazon, for example, but it's very easy to deploy. You just grab your executables and files. I suppose what I could do is I could probably put the PA server for Windows 32 or Windows 64 in the cloud, and then figure out a way to do the login connection through RDP and mapping. But look at Pavel's blogs, or send me an email on just david@embarcadero.com, and we can figure out how to make it really easy for you to deploy. But all clouds are different. They have different logins and authentications and things. So, yeah.
So, question: if there is a t-text component fill gradient?
Oh, I don't know. Not that I remember, but you could. One way to look is to look at our doc doc wiki. So it's just docwiki.embarcadero.com, and what choose your language, Delphi or not, and idiot text. Gradient color and text color values for caption only. Yeah, I would go and look in the doc wiki and see.
So there's a question about someone said that they heard you were working on NFC components for Delphi.
So there's NFC. If you want to do NFC, you have to set the permission for Android. My S4 has NFC built in. We haven't wrapped the NFC libraries with interface units or built components yet. Brian Long talks about some possibilities there in his Code Rage sessions, particularly on Bluetooth and using barcodes and things. But that's something that's on my list to build an example, and then for R&D to build components for things like QR code reading, barcode reading, Bluetooth support, and other things. There's always more to do. Nothing specific, but the APIs are there, so you can do something yourself. But it's on my blog list.
Yeah, it's on my list to do as well. Yeah. So many things to do. There's a question here about the Samsung Galaxy 3 7.0 as being a supported platform, or having problems with that.
Well, I see here there's Galaxy S3, which is what you have, right, Jim? And I have an S4.
And that S3 works fine.
The Galaxy Tab should, if it's the 7 and the 8, the only one that doesn't work in the Galaxy Tab 3 family is the Galaxy Tab 3 10.1. That has an Intel Atom processor. The other way to look is we have a page in our doc wiki, and it'll take me a moment to find it, as it relates to Android, so mobile Android development. There's a platform. Oh, here we go. Android device requirements document. And here we list what you need for the different documents. And then supported devices. Let me paste that in to this question. Here's the URL for everyone if I send it to all. Down here, we say, here's the versions of the operating system that we support. And then we also require you to have an ARM v7 processor, and with Neon support. And what is Neon? People always ask. It's a set of instructions. It's additional instructions that are used to accelerate different things, and we use those for graphics and floating point and so on. And it started with ARM v5, so it's ARM v7 with Neon support. And then down here, Galaxy Tab, we list different devices that we've tested with. So if it's not there, then we'll go to our QA group and they'll do testing. I'm not familiar with a specific issue except for Galaxy Tab 3 10.1, and that's because we don't support Android on Intel currently. but it's on our list of things that we're looking at.
I also provided a link. There's the delphi.wikia.com. There's a community collection of tested devices as well.
Okay.
There's a request to get a picture of you with your Google glasses on.
Okay,
So,
I'll do that. I'll do that today. I'll stick my face and I'll put that on the blog post that's post this webinar with the links in it. I'll stick my face in front of my Mac with the camera built in with the Google Glass on it. Jim, you did that already on your blog somewhere, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you have to do it with a mirror, so you're taking the picture with Google Glass. That's the.
Oh, I see. Well, I could have Google Glass taking the picture with the camera pointing at me, taking a picture.
There you go. Take a picture of the laptop or something.
Yeah.
So Olaf recently demonstrated integration with Facebook on iOS to do that. Because after finish loading event not got fired correctly, is it fixed in uplet date 2?
A good question. I'll ask Olaf, and I'll ask him myself. He was one of the testers, so if there was some issue with the demos he was doing, there's also, you can take a look at the fix list. So on the EDN in an article is all of the fixes in update 2. And again, the REST client library is available for you to build, even if you aren't building REST servers, because you want to be able to connect to REST servers that are out there. And it supports basic authentication for, username, password, or whatever. And it supports OAuth 1 and OAuth 2 as well. And we'll keep looking at other things we need to do for authorization and connectivity. There's more to come in future releases, so where we want to support a whole range of REST servers that are out there already, REST services, and give you just pre-built wizards and connection components so that it's all done for you. If you want to get to Facebook or SAP or Salesforce.com or whatever it might be. What is it? SharePoint was one I'm going to play with. Microsoft SharePoint has a whole REST interface where I want to take the client library components and connect. I have a SharePoint server set up here in the office just so I can do some stuff, put documents and whatever, and then I use the REST client components to connect to SharePoint. So there's lots of REST services out there, and you can use these components to connect to them and treat them as data sets.
So here's a question about getting a landscape splash screen display on iOS. It says it doesn't ever display.
Do you have to? That may be something with Apple, so we'll have to dig deeper. It could be that, and maybe Apple does that. I have to look at some other applications in landscape mode and see what they do.
It seems most applications only display either a landscape or a portrait splash screen. They don't. You just put one in and it displays just that one every time. But I may be incorrect.
Yeah, we'll just have to look. It's not something I've looked at.
I have an application that allows users to connect to one of many similar databases. Do I need data snap for each database, or can I have one that's assigned during runtime?
So all you need is the connection components for database. Use FireDAC, and then you can set the right parameters for the driver type, the physical link, and so on. You could have one data snap server that you might have an INI file when it starts up, or some other file, or some code. There's nothing special. I mean, if you hard code it to a certain database, then it's hard coded to that, but you can do everything in code. So you can use an FD connection component and change all the parameters of it on the fly all the time, change your mind, and go. You're done.
So here's a question about reducing the amount of time the black screen displays on launching an Android device. So they're already looking at the splash screen from Ryan Long. What else can be done?
Well, you have to. It goes back to the FireMonkey architecture, or FM architecture itself. A form actually doesn't display anything. A form versus a form in VCL is actually a Windows window, right? So you see something come up, even if your application's doing a lot of initialization. In Android or in iOS or in FM, the form is a container that then everything gets created based on the device you're on, the styles, and so on. So there is a little time where it comes up. On Android, what I'd probably do if you want to keep your, the customers happy is I would put something up for a short period of time. Some kind of screen or welcome to the program or whatever while you're constructing the forms in memory and then show the form that you want. That's probably what I would do. And again, FireMonkey on these devices, the team is working to add more smart linking capability based on what we think and know you're using. The challenge is, since you can instantiate objects, we need to link in a whole bunch of runtime because we don't actually know what you might instantiate on a form if you create a form on the fly. And so we have to include some stuff, but the team is looking at how to be able to have some additional options where you can specify, I'm not using this, I'm not using that, where it wouldn't have to initialize a bunch, but that's a work in progress.
So there's a question about ETA for C++ for Android.
C++ for iOS is out now as of Tuesday, 5 p.m. PST. The roadmap specifies C++ for iOS and Android before the end of winter. So if you need C++ for Android,
Excuse me.
We're currently on the timeline of winter, and winter ends right before spring starts in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes, Northern Hemisphere. It's definitely winter now. How about Windows Phone targets?
It's on the roadmap. If you look at the roadmap article that mentions Linux Server, after iOS and Android work is done, you'll also see Windows WinRT ARM. And once we have WinRT ARM, then we have Windows Phone. And again, for those that are interested in Android on Intel, we already have Intel compilers and we already have Android support. So the team is looking at how we might be able to short circuit putting that tool chain and libraries together for Android on Intel. But it wasn't listed on this, but there's these letters to be determined, other things on the roadmap where we list Linux Server and WinRT ARM. So I'm pushing hard for Android on Intel personally.
Yeah, the Windows Mobile is getting starting to take off, so I think it would be great to see that soon.
Yeah.
If I buy XC5, how would I get a hold of future Android development? Would I have to keep upgrading to XC6, XC7?
So there's a couple ways to do things. You can just upgrade to the versions and editions that you want and need. The other option is, when you purchase, is to add what we call software assurance. And software assurance is an annual renewal. And so if you buy it with maintenance or software assurance, whatever the term we use is now, then all you have to do is renew each year, and we'll deliver everything that's new during that 12-month period. So that's, if you need and want everything that's updated as it's being updated, then and new releases, then I would add the software assurance add-on when you purchase, and then you just then you don't pay upgrade price the next time. You just renew once every year.
And software assurance is a really good deal right now because they're pushing out releases a lot more often than once a year.
Yeah, there's a lot of well, and also because the devices are updating, right? We just had KitKat come out, so now there's some new APIs. Glass is out, there's new APIs. There'll be next versions of OS 10, next versions of iOS. So, and then as we get to other platforms and devices, we've got more engineers devoted to these products than we ever have, and because we're supporting all these platforms and all these cool things that you want us to enable you to do. So yeah, software assurance is a great deal.
So there's a question here about using ABB to connect to a over the network to connect to a device, and there is.
Yeah, you blogged about that, Jim, right? You blogged about how to.
I'll post a link to.
Yeah, Yusuf. Jim has that on his blog, how you can configure to do debugging and everything with an Android device that's on your network.
Yeah, there's a couple different options. I'm posting most of them here for you. Any news on XE6? Wow, XE5 is just out. They're working on it. It'll be done when it's ready.
We're working all the time. We've had 2 updates now, update 1, update 2 for XE5 for Delphi, and of course the C++ for iOS is new and really cool. I've done some videos, done 4. I'm 7 days behind. I'll get caught up for all of you C++, I promise I'll have 31 C++ for iOS videos before the month ends. And they're all short, 6 minutes, 5 minutes. Yeah.
What is the best way to connect to mobile app and an app running on Windows? Take a picture of on your phone and get your picture within your app running on Windows.
I don't know, all sorts of ways you could have a service, web service running on Windows. You could have a SOAP server written in Delphi on Windows. You could use some indie components and send the bitmap across the wire. You could have a DataSnap server where you would save the bitmap in a bitmap blob or in an in-memory table, because FireDAC supports in-memory databases as well. You don't have to have a database with FireDAC that's actually on a physical device. So there's many different ways to do it.
So here's a question. What is the preferred hardware, Mac or Windows, for the XE5 IDE?
So, I mean, you need a Windows operating system to run the IDE. It's still a Win32 app. If you're only going to do Android development, then you can use any Windows computer, Windows Notebook or whatever. If you need to do iOS development, OS 10 development, iPad, iPhone development, you need some kind of Macintosh device or connection to a cloud service that can connect to a Macintosh device. So here, some of us have MacBook Pros, some of us have lesser Macs, and then we network them. Some of the team members have Mac Mini. So if you have a Mac Mini, they're used about $220 US or so. They need to run at least, I think it's Lion operating system, and then you can just have a Mac Mini sitting next to your Windows computer connected on the same network, plug your iOS device in the Mac Mini, and you're set. Marco Cantu, before he had a Mac, used to carry around a Mac Mini, and some people still do. They're nice, small, thin little things. So preferred depends on what development you're doing. If you're doing Windows and Android, then you can do it all on Windows. If it's Windows, Android, and iOS and OS 10, then you need some kind of Mac thing to compile, link, for our ID to be able to get the information and also deploy the apps to a Macintosh for testing, debugging, and to the device for testing, debugging. We also have Mac in Cloud. We have a video that shows you Mac in Cloud. We have an agreement with the macincloud.com people where they give you 8 hours over a 30-day period to do testing using the simulator. They have a bunch of Macintoshes sitting on servers in the cloud. And that's free without even having to give them a credit card. And then after that, you give them a credit card and have more time. There's a system called Test Flight, which allows you to test over a cloud. And there's a bunch of other systems. What is Apcudo? Is that it, Jim? There's a bunch of other cloud-based systems that have a bunch of devices that you can do your testing. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yep, I was going to say, yeah, I think Apcudo, that's correct.
APKUDO is one. Our QA group uses a bunch of other ones. Some of them are pretty pricey, $600 a month, for example, but they have hundreds of Android devices connected, and you can connect and submit your apps to them, and you get these reports coming back. And Jim did a blog post about Apcudo. So there's ways to do that, to do testing without having a Mac and without having a device. But ultimately, you'll want a device that you can control, and a Mac Mini is probably the cheapest, smallest way to go.
Yeah, you can get a used Mac Mini pretty cheap. It doesn't need to be, if you're just using it on your network for deployment purposes, it doesn't have to be anything fancy.
It just needs to have an Intel processor and run OS 10 Lion or later, is my understanding.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Someone's asking for more information about software assurance, how much it costs, etc.
Yeah, it's all on the shop site, or you can contact our sales office. So if you contact
sales, they'd be happy to explain it to you.
Contact sales, they've got all that stuff. There was one. Some people have been, they've been getting. If your app, a couple of things I've had questions about. If your app doesn't show up, I mean, if it kind of starts up and it hangs or whatever on the different devices, the best way to find out what's going on is from the Windows ID to use Run with Debugging. Run with Debugging, then if an exception happens at startup time, like can't find file that you have in your deployment list, or you didn't put your Interbase Lite registration key, the exception will show up in the IDE. So if you get stuck right at the beginning versus something happens along the way, run with debugging, and any startup exceptions, runtime exceptions will show up in the IDE, just as if you were running a Windows app in the IDE on Windows. You get exceptions firing in the IDE, and they show up in the message window as well. The other thing I didn't show, but there's an app in Google Play by Chris Moeller called SysCheck, SYSCHECK. So if you're not sure if your device, or if your users aren't sure if their device has the right stuff in it to run FM-based apps, SysCheck it will tell you if it's got an ARM v7 processor and if it's got the Neon instruction set. So it's this app here by Christopher Moeller. So if you go to Google Play and just search for SysCheck, it will dump out ARM CPU, and it'll say the version number, and it'll say yes if it's got Neon. There might be some other stuff like 26-bit model that says no, but if it's got Neon and ARM v7, then everything's good. So it's a free install from Google Play called SysCheck. Christopher Moeller did it.
DataSnap server is stateful by default.
So it's not anything by default. I should say that if you use the wizard to create a DataSnap server, it will, and then you choose the type TCP, HTTP, HTTPS. It will generate the three components: the DS server component, a server methods unit for you, and by default, the server methods unit will have a life cycle of session. And once you have session, you can change it. Once you have session, then the state is saved in a separate thread for each connected client that comes into the DataSnap server. But again, you can change the life cycle to invocation, which is one command at a time, session, and server. And if you set server, you need to hook the connections when they come in and save their state. And you can also set up a connection pool. So for example, maybe you want to have 10 threads active at the same time, or 100 threads active at the same time. And we have documents about how to do all of that. It's just a property that you set on how many connections you want to come in and be live. There's also connection monitoring. So you can, on the server side, write code to send a stay awake method. It sends some bits out to a client to see if it's there. And if it doesn't respond, then it'll close the connection. The server could just close connections. Maybe you're getting too much data from a client app, and you would close it temporarily and make it reconnect. You might want to only take connections from midnight till 2 in the morning, so you could have a timer and auto start and stop the DataSnap server and only take connections during a certain time. Maybe it's a data collection type multi-tier application from some embedded devices talking like cache registers through something that would go to your DataSnap server. So you have all the possibilities to either write code or use the properties for DataSnap clients and servers.
So there's a question here about when Linux server support might be coming out, if we can have a ballpark on that.
I don't. It's on the roadmap, and it's when it's working and when it's ready.
And how about how to access contacts on Android and calendar on Android and iOS? If we have
so we don't have
that, or for simple.
Go ahead, Jim. We don't have a component for that. There's an API. We don't have a sample, I think, so we'll have to work on one. But it's doable. It's possible. I'm not sure if Brian Long showed getting at contacts or other things, but it's absolutely doable, and we need to build those examples for you. Or maybe you will.
Yeah, somebody will.
No, I'm not saying you. Whoever asked the question, maybe they will.
Yeah, oh yeah. When applying apply update 0, it seems like Oracle fails with an unknown error. Trying to use T-SQL Monitor, but it seems to fail. What suggestions for debugging that?
I mean, apply updates -1 means apply all updates. You can also put, I don't know about 0. I don't know what that would do. But you could say apply to updates 10. That would just take the first 10 updates and apply them. If you put -1, it'll send all the updates. Maybe 0 is like -1. But send me an email. I'm just david.I@embarcadero.com, and I've got Oracle XE on one of my machines, and I think I know we have Oracle test servers around here, and so we'll just try it and see what's going on.
Lots of, let's see. Does T-Web browser on Android allow programmatic access to the DOM and JavaScript? Seems like I heard it doesn't, but I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I've only used the web browser for navigating. If it returns something, as a response, then you have access to all the text that comes back. But we don't do anything special to parse what comes back. If by making an HTTP request, whether it's through Indy or something else, you get XML back, then you can take the result that comes back as a big string, and you can use the XML document component, which will parse it using ADOM on the devices, or using MSXML. It'll use that parser on Windows, and then from there you can grab all of the elements inside of the DOM. Marco has an example called Delphi Feeds. He uses the TID HTTP Indy component, and he calls RSS feeds from Delphi Feeds and from the Embarcadero blogs. And then he takes the string that comes back from the HTTP request, and he puts it into an XML document, and then from XML document he can navigate through it.
Okay, I'm actually going to let Tim take over. I have a call I have to be on here shortly. So
okay.
Sorry.
All right, so the next question is, can the notification be hooked up to SMS?
You'd have to write code. We don't have an SMS component. We have wrappers for the APIs, so you could do something. So when you get the notification brings you back, you can do whatever you want in code. We don't have a component for push notifications currently, but we have examples. Anders did an iOS push notification server and client side at Code Rage Mobile in June, based on some work that an MVP did down in Venezuela. So we need some more examples to show you how to do those things. But once you get the notification back, if it's a future notification or somewhere, you can do all sorts of things with it, display it in your app or whatever you want to do with it. So getting to SMS is definitely possible.
All right, then there's a question of how to resize or compress an image captured by the camera on Android.
So once you have a T image, FM comes with a whole set of image effects and transformations, including resizing and so on. You might take a color picture and change it to monochrome or sepia. I did a blog with C++ for iOS and did videos before that shows how to do all sorts of image effects and image operations. So you should take a look at FM's T-image component and image effects. We use the GPU and pixel shader to do all sorts of things, including resizing the image, converting it, beefing up using the bloom effect component, for example. And so you should take a look at XE5. We've got, I think, 50 image effects and transitions. So you can do like dissolves between one image and another, for example. But we also have a whole bunch of image effects for doing image filtering and resizing. So it's all doable with on iOS, Android, Windows, and OS X with image processing that we give you. And then there's third-party tools that do image effects and things too. But yeah, we have a lot of image support. And again, the GPU does all the work, so it leaves your CPU to do other operations.
All right, the next one is it true that currently image files can be included as resources for mobile deployment, but not video files?
So Gary, we can do image and video on Windows, OS 10, iOS, and Android. And there's examples that we ship in the mobile code snippets for playing video. The only thing that happens right now for video is we play it full screen. We don't play it in an area on the form on Android. We're still working on that. On iOS, you use the T Media Player component, and on Windows, and on Mac, and on Android, the T Media Player component takes a file, and then you just call the play method. And then there's a T Media Player component, which is the area where the video will play. And for iOS, that can be an area on your form that it'll play the video. And again, on Android, it will just play full screen based on the size of the video. We support a bunch of different formats. I've done blogs that show you the different audio files and video files. There are some recommended file formats, but we support other file formats as well. And so media playback, oh, here it is. Video on Android platform runs in full screen. To exit full screen, use the back button. Android videos are usually that format, but there's a code example down here, and there's also a mobile code snippet for audio record and play. But there's a note here about media playback on Android, but you can play video and audio. You can record audio, and there's a mobile code snippet for recording audio on iOS and Android, and even on Windows and OS 10 with the built-in mics or line inputs. When you capture the audio, and again, it's all file-based. For video, we don't capture video. We have a frame buffer ready event that you hook, so you can capture a frame at a time, and then you could put those into a frame-by-frame video if you wanted to. But so we do capture frames of video. We can play videos. We can capture audio and play audio, MP3, different formats. And again, I have blogs, and the documentation lists all the different formats. It says, do the examples come with the product that are available on the website? Both. The examples are included in the product, and they're also on SourceForge. So on SourceForge, if I search for RAD Studio demos SourceForge, then you'll find all the code down here, and you can go and browse the repository, and you can go down to, I think it's branches, RAD Studio. These are all the different samples. So RAD Studio XE5 update, here's CPP, or back FireMonkey Mobile code snippets, mobile code snippets Delphi. There they all are. Audio rec play, video playback, that's there. And for CPP, again, video playback, these are all the CPP snippets. So they're all in RAD, and I'll get you that one here. Let's copy that URL. And what happens is when we do a build, we pull from RAD Studio. So RAD Studio in SourceForge are always going to have the latest versions of all of our samples, including new samples and so on. So mobile code snippets, regular samples, data snap sample. FireMonkey Mobile are longer examples, more lines of code. The mobile code snippets are 10 lines or less usually for all that functionality, but it's all on SourceForge. You can get it. It also is included in the product, and you can open in the ID. There's file open project from version control. You can point it at SourceForge, and you can pull the example in. You can also go to the samples subdirectory, right mouse click. If you have, for example, Tortoise SVN or some other SVN client, you can do an update of your samples folder from SourceForge directly to make sure you always have the latest snippets and samples. Let's see. Any plans to modernize multi-threading components in a way, promise anonymous methods, absolutely possible? Maxime, I'm not sure. I mean, you can use T-thread, and they're always looking at things, but I'm not sure what else we might do in the way of multi-threading. Some stuff just works already. Preview of Father Christmas, question mark. That must have been a picture of me. Yeah, probably. I'm playing I'm Santa Claus here at work on December 18th. Let's see, he's using the REST request params. The REST request execute appears to trim the trailing slash. I'll have to take a look at that, Kelby. I'm not aware of it deleting anything or trimming off anything, but I'll double check from the REST base URL. I'll look at that in number 2. Let's see, just curious, what font are you using in your editor? I use Lucida Console, either 14 or 16 point font. I just find it's pretty clear when I'm projecting it and when it's being grabbed. Audio decoding, streaming, manipulating. We don't do streaming audio right now. Everything is file-based in FireMonkey currently. Team's looking at supporting streaming formats for audio and for video as well. Right now it's file-based. Compressing images to put it in a database. Well, you can take the image, take the data of an image. There's a bitmap data property as a sub-property, and you can do whatever you want with that. Can I modify the color of a button? You can associate different styles to buttons and other controls, and if one of the style settings you use with the bitmap style designer is buttons, great. You look at the custom styles, those are in the registries or download. We definitely color them. Some of them are sort of a Tron transparent kind of look, so you can do anything you want with custom bitmap styles. Does XE5 Pro support OS 10 development? Yes, it does. XE5 Pro for Delphi and C++ Builder gives you Windows 32, Win64, and OS 10 support. If you have Rad Studio Pro, then you get Win32, Win64 for Delphi and C++, and you get mobile Delphi iOS and Android and C++ Builder iOS. So it depends on the edition and the product that you choose. Pro. Enterprise gives you data snap and enterprise connectivity to remote databases. Let's see, Rogers asks, XE5 was released shortly after release XE4. Well, it was about 6 months, maybe 5.5 months. And then you're asking about other releases. We're going to keep doing releases because we're tracking different changes in the operating systems and new devices coming out. So the best thing to do is to upgrade to XE5, add software assurance maintenance to it, and that'll give you 12 months. Any new releases that come out, you'll get. So it's the best deal in town. After you add that original software assurance maintenance price, I think it's 30%, Tim, of whatever you're upgrading or a new license, then each year you just pay the renewal price. You don't have to pay the upgrade plus renewal price. Right, Tim?
That is correct.
It also depends on what the real prices are whenever you're in different parts of the world. But yes, we're going to be doing a lot of updates. There's going to be new devices. Apple's going to come out next June or next sometime with a next version of iOS and OS 10. KitKat just came out a little while ago. Android, Google might come out with something else. There'll be new devices and new functionality. This is the world. Get to XE5. You've got everything that we have today. Add software assurance. You'll get even more that we're working on. So it's all happening here. A lot of resources being put on these products to give you everything that we can put into them in every release, whether it's done as an update like update 2 right now and update 1 a little while back, or it's a new release. So stay tuned with us. We'll keep you posted. But best thing is get XE5. Look at all that you can do and add software assurance, and then for 12 months you'll get everything, and then at the end of 12 months you just pay the renewal price and you get another 12 months worth. So it's a great deal, and look at all the functionality. One set of source code to build all these different kinds of applications. I don't know if for all of you that are on here, why are you waiting? Start now. Build lots of apps quickly. You can do it fast. And you can still do VCL windows. I showed you using the sensors. We're going to be doing some more VCL work for Windows, along with all the FM work that we're doing across all these devices. So get on XE5. Maxine, can I confirm that software assurance maintenance is an absolute winner in terms of price? Well, you do the math, right? Some people do the math and say, well, I'll skip a few versions and not upgrade, and then I'll upgrade, and then you've missed all that great functionality. So that's your choice, Maxine. you can do the math on a simple calculator. Yeah, you can write a Delphi or C++ builder app and do the math, versus updating periodically or every time upgrading versus just paying maintenance. Upgrade price is usually 50% of list, something like that. Maintenance is 30%.
So this is a question I get occasionally about if you can use the TID TCP server, basically any of the Indy components on mobile devices.
I don't see any reason why not. I'm not sure what you might do. Maybe you'd have a pad that's a server and some mobile devices talking to it out in a party or at a bar or in a park or wherever.
Yeah,
Internet access. I don't see why you couldn't use the server-side Indy components. They work on iOS, Android, OS 10, and Windows.
Yep, definitely. You'd want to be aware of just the definitely more constrained platform than a big server, but you certainly could use it.
Let's see.
So the questions about
components. We don't have a barcode reading component. Fernando Risotto did a blog post back in, I think, June or July, where he did an iOS Delphi barcode reader using an open source project library. Do you remember which one he used? I keep forgetting.
I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, but there are several different barcode reading, QR code reading libraries for iOS and Android. You can just grab those and then hook the camera using the T-camera component and go. I'll resurrect those and put those in a blog. I'm going to do a recap blog with links to some of the samples I did with VCL sensors. We'll do the glass. We'll put some pictures up and the links to things. I'll find that blog post. Brian Long also showed how to do things in his Code Rage 8 talks on the iOS API and Android API, but we want to be able to provide NFC components, Bluetooth components, QR code and barcode components, so you can just drop them down and reuse them. So that's a really good question, Mike, and we're going to, again, if we don't wrap it today, you can connect. If we've wrapped it as a class, we want to have components. And of course, there's new APIs coming out, like there's some new Google Glass APIs that Jim's looking at, R&D's looking at. There's always going to be new APIs and maybe some certain popular static libraries that you want to link in. And so there's always more to be done. Some community members are writing articles, just like Jeff Overcash wrapped the text-to-speech in a Delphi interface unit. So a lot of work is being done. I think Chewy down in Singapore is working on a tool that'll take the Java API interfaces and create Delphi units. He's working on an automated tool. He's got a proof of concept video on YouTube. So there's a lot of people doing cool things to help us cover. Just as in the early days of Windows, we had the Project Jedi group. They wrapped DirectX. They wrapped a whole bunch of other API libraries that we hadn't wrapped ourselves. And that was the genesis of Project Jedi, was to have community effort to help provide Delphi interface units for APIs that we hadn't got to yet. Yeah. Same thing with the TCP/IP components, the Project Indy people. We didn't have all the components for every kind of server or client for TCP, FTP, Gopher, and everything else. And now we have those on all 4 platforms that we support as a whole set of components for client and server side. So we'll get there. Keep putting those questions and put suggestions in, send us emails, and we will hook to and provide components or license components if somebody else has one, so that you can just drag and drop and work as fast as humanly possible, building great apps for all these platforms using Delphi and C++ Builder. Oh, I forgot to do C++ Builder iOS. So what I'll do is record a couple, or I'll take a couple of my videos I've done and I'll stick them in the replay. Because we have C++ for iOS shipped as part of XZ 5 Update 2 on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
So the question just came about if there's news for support for Linux servers.
No, the 2 things that are on the roadmap that are listed to be worked on after we finish some more iOS and Android work. We've shipped the C++ iOS. We now are still working on, until sometime between now and the end of winter, C++ for Android and some other things we want to do. So after we finish some more iOS and Android work, and we're also doing some more Windows work and some VCL work, we'll also get Linux server, so you can move your DataSnap servers there, put your socket servers, put your SOAP servers there. And then we also have on our roadmap looking at WinRT ARM,
because we want to be able to, as Windows Phone seems to start moving forward, and next year Microsoft will complete the acquisition of Nokia. We think that we can take our ARM compiler and all the work we've done for iOS and Android and hook it into Windows Phone. So WinRT ARM is also on the roadmap. And then a few other fun things that we're working on in what it says in the roadmap after those two, TBD, meaning other things that to be announced and determined as we move forward. So lots going on in R&D all over the world.
Yes.
More people working on these products than ever before because of all the platforms and other places where we want to go. So it's a pretty cool time. And look how fast you can build things. I mean, here we are in December of 2013, and I can build applications for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android using the same source code. Maybe I if-def some things. Maybe I do some runtime checking of some devices. But just as fast as you could build Delphi apps in Delphi 1, 2, 3, and so on, you can do the same thing now for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. It's just unbelievably awesome. And I don't know why anyone, all of you that are here, all the people who've been with us, why everybody isn't on XE5. This is the time. All the special offers, the countdown timers happening. If there's a reason you have why you can't move forward, let me know. Jim and I will get online between now and the end of the year in some Google Hangouts and other things just to show you things, answer questions, and to help get you to want to take advantage of these great offers. iOS barcode library. Oh, it's libzbar. That's what it was. Yep. libzbar was the one for iOS that Fernando. Thanks, Robert. That's a great. That was it exactly. There's a couple different ones that are out there. I'll just say thanks so that that name gets put in the log. But great. Yeah, that was good. So if you have other reasons, there's a couple minutes here. Why aren't you on XE5? If you're on XE5, thank you very much. Then maybe you've seen some newer things you can do or some things you hadn't explored yet. But if there's reasons why you're not moving to XE5 between right now or tomorrow or next day or Tuesday, or at least before this countdown timer goes to 0, we'd like to know. Ralph wants Linux. Okay. He's got that a higher priority. Okay. I understand. People do have reasons. But in our products today, for the things that are in our products today, if there's something you don't understand, if you need some help to get you to see all the power and the performance and the rapidity that you can use to build applications on all these platforms, I'd like to know what it is. Send me an email, david@embarcadero.com. I'll show you how to do it. Mike's asking what was in update 2. A whole bunch of bug fixes, C++ for iOS. Marco talked about some other hidden gems that are in there. There's a list of what's new. There's a list of bug fixes that we put in, 100 and so, a couple hundred, 120, 110, whatever it was. Updates, fixes we did. We've added, we've improved the iOS 7 support. We've done some additional Android things for things that we found. So it's all there, and you can grab it. If you've got XE5, just go. I did it today. I updated from update 1 to update 2 this afternoon before the 5 p.m. session. I'm running update 2. Let's see, stack trace. I'd buy on that basis alone. Andrew said, actually going to buy anyway. Thanks, Andrew, for buying anyway. I'll pass stack trace along to the debugger team. And Mike's saying he bought in the last 2 hours. Thank you very much, Mike. Let's see, anybody out there doing C++ Builder? Or is it all Delphi people right now? Is there image processing sample code to learn? Yes, we have 50 image effects and image transitions. Sepia, I did a blog, showed an example of using a sepia image filter on a picture. We use the GPU to do the pixel shader-based image processing. You can do all sorts of things with blurring effects and bloom effects. All of those are there. We have tutorials in the doc wiki on using image effects. Again, there's effects and transitions. If you're moving between one image and another, you can do, I don't know, there's 10 or 15 different transition effects. So all of that is there. We've got 3D in there. So you've got spheres and 3D rectangles and a camera you can move around to move your perspective. You can put textures on the sphere. You can put color on the sphere. You can have meshes. You can build a custom mesh. Anders, when he was here, did
cool 3D trig functions that you could move a camera to rotate around and zoom in. So all of that is available and has been since the beginning in FireMonkey 3D, and we have examples for 3D and HD or 2D. So there's all of that is available in the product today and has been since the first version of FireMonkey for doing GPU-based image processing, image effects, and there are third-party libraries that do all sorts of things to help you as well. Okay. Anything else? I'm looking, watching it pop up. So okay, there's thank you. And again, take your apps, and if you run the app in Korea, it'll have Korean characters on the keyboards. I didn't show you, but every editable item, T-Edit and T-Memo, has keyboard type you can select, a URL keyboard, a numbers and punctuation keyboard, the default keyboard. We've got 7 or 8 different virtual keyboards you can choose from, and you can set different keyboards types on each editable item. The other thing is T-Edit, T-Memo, these editable user interface elements, they have built-in cut, copy, paste, select all. That is all built for you. You don't have to write any code to deal with clipboards and clipboard handling on both Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. That's all just available. There was a question about multilingual. FireMonkey has a T-Lang component and their third-party components for localizing the strings in your applications. There's a couple things. We don't have full accessibility support yet. That's being worked on. And we don't have bidirectional, right to left, left to right. That's being looked at as well in R&D. So it's on our things to do. But there's so much in there. People are building applications and putting them into Google Play. They're putting them into iOS App Store. They're building Macintosh apps. We have a gallery. You can look for RAD Studio Application Showcase, and you can filter by the different platforms. As people are putting more apps in there, we don't put them in. They have to give us permission. They put the information in. More of those will show up. Reconnect, retry when communicating with web services. You need to test to see if you can connect, and then have your logic that just periodically retries, maybe on a timer, maybe on an event. That's not many lines of code. It's a couple lines of code. I know you're talking about it as connection resilience. So I would put a timer with maybe some timeout to try and retry. There was Jim, there was a blog post, I forget who did it. I think it was done in Australia. And then Danny Megan said, well, just use one of the Indie components to test to see if the network is available. And then if you're connected to a web service, if it drops out, you can keep trying the web service. That's a couple lines of code in a timer event that you start and stop. But that's a good idea, that putting some component that might have a retry count that would periodically in its own retry. That's an easy component to build. All the component development, you can say component, new component, inherit from T component, and build your own components, whether they're VCL components or FM components across all the platforms. Help, document, complete, done in exe5 version. Well, help is always a work in progress. The doc team works 24/7 around the world. And you can go to the doc wiki, and if you don't see some documentation, keep checking. If it usually will give you the interface at the top, which will tell you the parameters and types. Some of them are so self-explanatory, like T sensor category. We give you the sensor category values. We could put some text under there that says, here's the sensor categories, and then list the sensor categories. So we'll get to that. But there's a lot of help. Thousands, 20,000, 30,000, I forget how many DocWiki entries. And again, it's being updated all the time. So, okay, everyone, it's after 7 o'clock. I've been up since, well, about 4 this morning, and I was out of town the last couple days. So I'm going to sign off now. I'll do a few C++ iOS examples in the replay as well that I didn't get to, and intersperse them in along with the Delphi examples in the replay. I'll get all the 3 Q&A sessions, so you'll get all the questions that were asked by people at 6 a.m. and 11. I want to thank Jim. Jim, thank you very much, and Tim, thank you for helping. And also, thank you, all of you, for spending time. Mike's asking about what's a good version to give high school students to play with. Well, we have academic pricing on the products. You could just let them download the trial, and they can try the trial for 30 days. It's a full version of the product. just build some cool apps for mobile. There's also the starter edition at a lower price. And Mike, if you want to do something in a school, contact our sales office. We just recently did a deal in South Africa. South Africa, starting next year, all of the high schools will be teaching Delphi, except for 2 districts. And then in 2015, all the districts of South Africa will be teaching Delphi. They all get a version of Delphi for free for their labs, and all the students in South Africa for generations to come in high school will be using Delphi to learn programming. And then once they get into college, they can use whatever language they want. That's a deal that happened a couple months ago. We're very excited and proud. I was down in South Africa last year. I'm going to go again probably in the first quarter of this year when it's winter here and summer there. Okay, Jim, and okay, everybody. It's been great. Great to have everybody. And Jim, thanks for helping with the Q&A.
Tim's actually helping some of the answer some questions too. So thanks.
Yeah, everybody, thanks a lot, and have a great rest of the year. If you don't have XZ5, get it. It's great. You can build a whole bunch of stuff. If you're C++, you can do iOS now as well. It's really cool. And otherwise, have a great summer if you're in the southern hemisphere. Have a great winter if you're in the northern hemisphere, and have a great holiday time and a great right before New Year's. And we'll see you somewhere face to face or online next year. Bye.